Go. Mr. Chair, the room is ready.
Thank you very much. Luke Sinclair, Chair of the Planning Commission. Welcome everyone to the August 23rd, 2021 meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. I'm going to turn it over to Becky Pepper, who will give the rules of the Zoom call.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Becky Pepper, Planning Manager. Joining me here in the City Commission room is Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. Tonight we'll work alongside the chair, who is on remote video, to facilitate the meeting proceedings. Currently, we have everyone muted so that we can talk through the general ground rules for tonight's meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found in the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you're muted, a red line will appear over the icon. This will make it easier for everyone to hear the meeting. Just remember to unmute and if and when you want to speak. You can also turn your video camera on or off by clicking the video icon in the menu. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on for the duration. If you're participating by phone, you can enter *6 to mute and unmute your phone. Somewhere on the Zoom screen, you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all of the meeting participants. Commissioners, you must state your name and title each time you speak. Members of city staff must also state their name and title each time they speak. And I would ask that the applicants and members of the public identify themselves each time before they speak to ensure that everyone is able to follow along. When public comment is sought on an item, individuals participating via Zoom should use the raise your hand feature. For Windows and Mac users, you can access this feature through the participants button at the bottom of your screen. Android and iPhone users can access this feature through the More button located on the bottom right corner of their screen. And for those calling in by phone, you may dial *9. Individuals will be called upon by name in the order they appear on the meeting host screen. When you're called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The chair will then call for in-person public comment for those who are physically present. Staff will direct you to the podium to speak while following social distancing and safety protocols. The regular 3-minute time limit will apply. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, staff will call on each commissioner individually to provide their vote. Staff will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. I again want to remind everyone to please mute yourself when you're not speaking. And now I'll turn the meeting over to the chair.
Thank you, Becky. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Sorry, everybody. My daughter made a entrance there. Luke Sinclair, Chair. We have no general business tonight, so the first thing we need to do is receive and amend or approve the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting on July 26th and 28th of 2021. And a question, I guess, point of order before we do that for Jeff or Becky. I was not at the July 26th meeting. Do we need to have 2 votes, with me abstaining from one of them and anyone else that missed any of those, or just notes that?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. In the case of that, where someone would like to abstain from a vote, we would ask that you take a motion for the first meeting and then a motion for the second meeting to allow for that abstention to occur.
Okay. Thank you, Luke Sinclair, Chair. So in that case, could we, I guess, are there any comments or changes to the minutes for the July 26, 2021 meeting? Or motions to approve?
Move that we approve.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Rexroad. Do we have a second? Commissioner Ashworth seconded. Jeff, could you take a roll?
Certainly. Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Sorry, wrong button. Abstain. I wasn't present.
Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Abstaining.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Willie.
Abstain.
Motion passes 6-0 with 3 abstentions.
Then for the July 28th, 2021 meeting, does anybody have any comments or revisions for those minutes or motions to approve? Commissioner Ashworth?
I move to approve the July 28th minutes.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Ashworth. Motion to approve those minutes. Does anybody want to second that? Seconded by Commissioner Rexroad by motion of the hand. Jeff, could you read the roll on that one?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. Commissioner Ashworth,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter,
Yes.
Commissioner Payton,
Abstain.
Commissioner Rexroad,
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin,
Yeah.
Commissioner Sinclair,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Willie.
Abstain.
Motion passes 7-0 with 2 abstentions.
Thank you very much, Luke Sinclair, Chair. Then that takes us to the next part of our agenda, committee reports. Are there any reports that any commissioners want to make for committees that have met over the past month? I'm not seeing anybody raise a hand. So we'll move on to communications. Are there any written communications from the public that we need to receive that aren't already in the packet?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. All communications were in your packet this evening.
Are there any written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners to receive?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. None this evening.
Are there any written actions of any waiver requests, determinations made by the city engineer that we need to receive?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. None this evening.
Luke Sinclair, Chair, sorry. Are there any commissioners that need to disclose any ex parte communications? Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes, Commissioner Ashworth, I have an ex parte communication to report. I had a conversation with Dorothy Barnett of the Climate and Energy Project. It was a general conversation about solar farms, one of the topics tonight. The topics that we discussed included decommissioning, the size of solar farms, a definition of a solar farm, and the Sedgwick County regulations. If there are more items that come up as we discuss this that Ms. Barnett and I talked about, I will bring them up as they come into our discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Ashworth. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Any other disclosures of ex parte? Commissioner Willie.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I had quite a few conversations. Since this is a legislative item, I'm not sure how much detail you want me to disclose. I would say I'm sit on the board of the Kansas Rural Center, which advocates for sustainable farming and sustainable energy practices. So there was a lot of discussion amongst that board about what kind of comments to make. And I think Jack Pistora, who is our acting executive director, is here to speak tonight. I also had a conversation with Eileen Horn, and I think Dorothy Barnett will speak probably to many of those points. And I had a site visit this morning at the Baldwin City Solar Farm with members of the Evergy team and the members of the Baldwin City Public Works. And for that, I'm happy to share any of those experiences as they come up and are relevant in our conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Carpenter, I saw your hand up.
I had a discussion of a general nature with Michael Allman about solar power and the interplay between solar farms and agriculture. Also had a similar conversation with Thad Holcomb.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Any other disclosures of ex parte communications? Not seeing any. Are there any commissioners that need to abstain from any specific agenda items tonight? Good. There's only one, so I'm glad to hear that. Now then is the part of the meeting where we entertain general public comment from members of the public. This is a time to bring items before us that are not on our regular agenda. So if anybody here at the meeting tonight on the Zoom call or in person is here to talk about any of the items on the agenda, please hold your comments till then. You'll have an opportunity to talk. If you do have something besides that to say, you can either raise your hand on the Zoom call or step to the podium in the chambers, and you have 3 minutes.
This is Becky Pepper, Planning Manager. I do not see anybody here in the City Commission room for general comment, nor do I see any raised hands on Zoom.
Thank you, Becky. Luke Sinclair, Chair. With that, then, we'll turn to our regular agenda. The first item, and I think the only item on our regular agenda, is to consider approving a text amendment, TA 21-00173, to add standards for commercial utility-scale solar energy conversion systems to the zoning regulations for unincorporated Douglas County. And for this, I believe we have Mary Miller with staff to do a presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. Mary Miller, City County Planner, and I'm going to share my screen real quick here. I think. This text amendment was before you in June, and you considered it and took public comment, and then you returned it to staff with direction to consider the public comments and the comments made at the commission meeting and return it to you with changes that were marked up in the draft language. And so in the agenda packet, there is a table showing all the comments with staff's discussion and whether or not we accepted them partially or did not accept them. And there is a marked up draft version. In that version, everything in red are changes that were made based on public comment. Everything in green, those are staff changes. Made after additional review or sometimes after additional changes needed to be made based on comments from the public. So I'll divide this into 3 sections. I'll go through the Planning Commission comments that were made at the meeting, and then I'll do the public comments that were made at the June meeting, discuss the changes that were made on the major ones. Some were just very minor, as you'll note in the report, but the major changes, discuss the ones that were made. And we have been talking with several firms that are interested in solar energy. And so I discussed some of the changes with them. And at the end, I'll be able to tell you some that they would still like to see that we didn't make. And then I'll finally go through comments that we received today. So as far as the June meeting, one of the comments made was that the commissioner would be comfortable with reducing setbacks and buffering requirements if the property be treated more like a soil bank. And I believe with the planting requirements that we've got and the soil testing that we could consider it pretty adequate to be a soil bank. And so we have reduced the setbacks and buffering. And I'll discuss that a little bit more later. This was also based partly on public comments. Some comments received from the firms indicated that excessive setbacks and wide buffering would require them to expand and use more property, which kind of a solar farm sprawl. And so we want to make sure we were using adequate setbacks and buffering, but not more than really is required. The commission asked for information on soil contamination. And so we provided 2 links to reports that we use. One of the firms we've been working with indicated that the second report, solar farming, not a good use of agricultural land, might not be a reputable source. And they may have more information on that. These are just things we found through our online research. One commission asked if it would be appropriate to have different levels of fencing. And a public comment was raised that solar energy conversion systems are a very important part of that is energy storage. And so as we added battery storage, we did add different levels of fencing. There's one type of fencing for the solar array, but then a different, more stringent fencing for the battery storage. Is minimum area needed? There is no minimum area requirement. And actually in the definitions, we have 3 definitions. One is just what is a solar energy conversion system. And if you look in the draft language, you'll see that was revised because we had erroneously placed a lot of information in there that really only applied to the commercial scale, distribution lines and storage equipment. So that was revised. In the first definition, we're just trying to define what is a solar energy conversion system, or a solar panel technically. And then we have the 2 different types. We have small scale, which is really just personal or accessory. And based on some of the comments, it looks like maybe there's some confusion there. Maybe that should be revised to personal accessories and not small scale. And then the one that would require the conditional use permit is the commercial or utility scale. And so anything that's not personal or accessory would require a conditional use permit. And so we did not set a minimum area. If it's 5 acres and it's not being used for personal purposes, then it would require a CUP. We were asked, how was the 1,000 acres arrived at for the maximum? And we were trying to balance the need for renewable energy and then our need to maintain agricultural inventory. And so 1,000 acres seemed reasonable to us. We did make some revisions based on public comments. There was questions of how are we measuring the 1,000 acres? And we would just be measuring what's under the solar array, not the area within the fences and not the area that's leased. That way we're not penalizing them if they're setting aside stream corridors or woodlands. You know, those areas that are not used for solar array would not be counted in the maximum. And we also added information in that section that noted that Board of County Commissioners could vote to exceed that limit if they felt it was appropriate and met the intent of the code. And so I think we built some flexibility into that, which brings us to the next question. We were asked, is it possible to build flexibility into the standards, especially to accommodate new technology? We added a provision near the end called modifications, which notes that every standard in this section can be modified by the Board of County Commissioners if they find that it's appropriate. And this is something we intend to add to all the conditional use permits when we do our update to the zoning regulations. Since it's a conditional use, each one is different, and the commission could change or alter the standards, but they're the basic guides. So we did build that flexibility in. If technology changes and it's more significant, we would have to do a text amendment, I believe, to achieve any more flexibility. And then where we just basically in our draft language said trees would not be removed or they'd be protected. And there was asked, what is the definition? There is a definition in the zoning regulations, and we should have used the term stands of mature trees because that's what we use throughout the zoning regulations. And that's defined. It's an environmentally sensitive land. And so they would be under the same protection standards as they are in the environmentally sensitive lands. So we did clarify that in our language. So some of the changes for public comments, as I mentioned in the definitions, we did revise them to include battery storage. And then we made the change to clarify that not all solar energy conversion systems have distribution lines and appurtenant equipment. That is only when they're larger scaled. The height limitation, we had set the limitation at 15 feet. One public commenter noted that if you were going to have, and I always get this name wrong, I think it's agrivoltaic, or if you're going to have a mixture of agriculture and photovoltaic uses, they need to be taller than 15 feet. And they showed examples of that where people could just farm under the solar panels. So we did revise the height limitation to say no higher than 15 feet unless it's going to be an agrivoltaic process where farming will occur under it, and then it could be exceeded. The size limitation, as I noted, we did clarify that we're only looking at what's under the solar array, and it can be modified. The Planning Commission can make a recommendation on the modification, and the Board of County Commissioners would be the ones that would decide if a request to modify that would be approved or not. Topsoil removal, we had noted that should not occur. However, we got comments that sometimes you do have to move the topsoil in order to install the equipment, and then also for reclamation. So we revised that to note that topsoil removal should be minimized, but that it could occur with installation and reclamation, but in no cases should topsoil be removed from the property. And then we did receive comments on the setbacks, that they would like to see the setbacks revised. What we had previously proposed was 100 feet from the required right-of-way. And in the unincorporated portion of the county, most roads don't have the required amount of right-of-way dedicated. So we always have to look at how much right-of-way should they have, not how much do they have, but how much should they have, and then we measure the setback from that. So we had previously proposed 100 feet from all rights-of-way and 50 feet from other property lines that aren't adjacent to roads and 500 feet from any residence. And we revised that to note that they should comply with the setbacks for the zoning district. And it could be as close as 100 feet from any residence. We added a provision that would change the setbacks. There's no setback required if you're adjacent to a participating property. And if a residence on a participating property waives the setback requirement, that could also not have a setback. Anytime a setback is waived for a participating property, a property that's included in the project, they would need to provide a waiver. And so that way we can keep it in the file for the CUP, so we'll have it for future reference. And just to clarify, if these would be permitted in the Ag 1 district, and the setbacks in the Ag 1 district are based on the classification of the road next to your property. So if it's on a principal arterial, which would be a highway or a county route, the setback is 150 feet from the required right-of-way. And so that would be greater. It's a greater setback than we had previously proposed. If you're on a minor arterial or major collector, it would be 100 feet. So that would be the same. But on minor collectors, which would be 75, and locals, the setback is 50 feet. Those would both be a reduction in setback. And then we did recommend going 30 feet from the rear and the side, because that's what any other structure in that district is allowed to do. So changes that we made for other changes, they asked about a change to signage. We had recommended signage along the perimeter fencing at 1 per 100 feet, and we had based that on our work with quarries. But quarries are typically fenced with barbed wire, and the signage is no trespassing, just to keep people out. The solar arrays and the solar farm will have security fencing. So we agreed that less signage would probably be appropriate. It's more of a warning signage. So it has to have the appropriate language, but they could be as far apart as 500 feet. And then there's a section about the modifications to note that the Board of County Commissioners can approve a modification from these requirements. And then there was a standard added about building permits. We don't usually include building permits in the conditional use permit language, but the codes department asked for this as they're not really equipped to inspect and review these kind of projects. So the language they asked us to add is, the applicant shall contract with a county-approved special inspector and or plan reviewer for plan review and all required construction inspections at the operator's expense. And so that was added primarily for the applicant's information, kind of a heads up, and just to get that on the books. So those were the changes to the standards. We went through, and there are some changes to the things that are required with the applications. Under the existing conditions, we asked for all roads to be shown within 100 feet of the property. That was revised to just showing us the access drives and the points of ingress and egress on the site. And then, of course, the access drives through the site. And in the section called supplemental information, item number 7, we were requiring an interconnection agreement with the energy provider to be provided to us with the application. But the firms informed us that that's usually never provided until they actually have an approved CUP, and then they're able to get their agreement with the energy provider. So this is still required, but the timing has been moved back so that it's following the approval of a conditional use permit. And once a conditional use permit is approved by the county commission, a resolution is published, but there are still conditions that have to be met, and this would be one of those conditions. And so the plans are held in the planning office until the conditions are met. And then when all the conditions have been met, the plans are released to zoning and codes, and there they get their conditional use permit and they get their building permits. So it would still be required before they were able to get building permits. On the landscape plan, we did revise about the trees, just to note that stands and mature trees must comply with the environmental protection standards. And in the soil sampling plan, we had noted that if a panel was broken, it needed to be removed or testing would be required. And the firms we work with noted that it's a lot of times panels could be chipped or scratched and it actually doesn't create an issue. So we added the language, if it's damaged to the point that it poses an environmental threat due to contamination, and isn't removed within 30 days, then a soil test is required. And the Sierra Club contacted us and asked us, how would we monitor this? And we passed that along to the firm we were working with, one of the firms, and they said they monitor all their panels remotely. They can keep an eye on them through their computers, and so they would know if a panel had damage. So we asked them if there's a way that zoning and codes could be linked in with that, so that they would also know, or they could be informed. We don't have that worked out yet. We just had our discussion the other day. So this is probably a standard that would need a little bit more information as to just how would zoning and codes know if a panel had been damaged. And then the bond, item 13 in supplemental information, we removed the fixed amount. We were recommending $40,000 an acre or the third party estimate. And we removed that. It would just be based on the third party estimate. And that would be a third party that's selected by the county commission, but paid for by the applicant. So the changes staff made, if you look through there, you'll see in green, we did make some changes to the fencing, primarily to battery storage. We added the battery storage section. We added a section on noise. That's one of the things when you have solar farms, the row of arrays at the end, there's an inverter and it has a hum, and it's not extremely loud, but it's just a steady hum. And if you're nearby, if there's a residence nearby, that could be obnoxious. So we are recommending that the noise be no more than 60 decibels at the source. And the firms that we've been working with asked if that could be measured at the property line rather than at the source. You know, it could be quite a ways from the property line, depending. There may be trees between it and the property line. And so I think measuring it at the property line may be reasonable, but we may want to change that noise level. If we change it to property line, we may want to change the decibel level. The next two items were added by the county engineer. One was a stormwater plan. They wanted to have a drainage plan so that they could know if they needed to have detention on site. And also they revised the transportation plan language that we had, made it much more concise. And then also the emergency plan, there were some changes to that, just beefing that up. And we primarily based that on other communities. We wanted to make sure we had a good emergency plan. One of the things that the firms that we're working with asked about is, could they submit preliminary plans when they're just submitting the application for the conditional use permit, because they don't know if they have a use approval yet, rather than spending all the money on engineering plans. And that's technically how we work, but we don't actually spell it out in the code. But I think we could add a provision noting that with the application, we want preliminary plans. And if you get preliminary approval, if it goes to the county commission and they note that they feel favorable to the project, but they want the plans, and then at that point, you would need to provide complete plans. And so then it would go back to the county commission with the full plans after the county engineer reviewed them. That way, it's still in the public process, but they do have their preliminary assurance before they spend the money on the engineered plans. So that seems reasonable, and that's a change that we could make. We just discussed that a day or two ago, so we didn't put those changes in the proposed regulations. So at the meeting we had the other day, these are the items that I took in my notes were still outstanding. They may have some others. They did not want the area limitation of 1,000 acres. They would rather have that be decided on a case-by-case basis. With the battery storage, they wanted compliance with national standards rather than us establishing standards. I think for a CUP, we might want some simple standards that are in alignment with national standards. And we could always say, or as the national standards, but I think it's just helpful to have some of the more important ones written out so that we don't have to refer to the national standards every time we look at them. They asked us to replace fire suppression with another term such as prevention or management. And I don't understand, maybe it's the electrical nature of the use and suppression of fire. I don't see an issue with using prevention or management, changing the terminology. We'd be happy to do that. And then also they wanted us to measure noise at the property line rather than at the source. And I think that would be appropriate as long as we reviewed and maybe have reevaluated what that decibel level would be. And then the clarification that preliminary studies are required with the application. More complete studies, engineered studies would be required once they have the preliminary approval. And that way the county commission still reviews it and they review it. They make their decision based on those complete studies. And we have a condition that says anything underground must be removed, everything underground. And I know we were thinking primarily of footings and piers, and they noted that often bury cables more than 36 inches underground, and they would like those to be able to remain. And we got this comment too recently. I think it's something we should look into to see if anyone would have a concern with those remaining underground. We could make an exception if that seems reasonable. And then they asked that the setback from property lines, rather than being 30 feet, be reduced to 10 feet. So some of the new public comments we received just this morning. We did receive pictures of the Baldwin City solar farm. I think Karen really shared those with us. Those are pages 90 to 93. Some of the comments were to preserve farmland, prime farmland, allow no solar farms on prime farmland. One person said, if we determine the land after a solar farm is on it can be returned to agricultural use successfully when it's decommissioned, that we should not place unnecessary restrictions such as the 1,000 acre maximum. One comment said that we should set standards to ensure the land is not permanently scarred, but remains viable for agriculture. And I think that's one of our overriding goals of the standards. So hopefully we do achieve that. There was a report regarding the impact of climate change itself on agriculture, and this recommended removing the 1,000 acre cap and reducing the setbacks. We had a comment that recommended we reduce the area permitted to 500 acres. That would be the maximum, but allow an increase to 1,000 acres if property in the CRP program, Conservation Reserve Program, is included, or if the solar arrays are used for agricultural production, if they're raised and we're just farming underneath it. And to prohibit any location on class 1 and 2 soils. We had another comment to allow on farmland, but not class 1 or 2 or prime farmland. But to allow it on farmland if the design enables the continuation of ag production under the array. So if the arrays are raised and we're still farming it, then it could be allowed on farmland as long as it's not class 1 or 2 or prime. And then to revise the definition of small scale, CSECS, to include townships and cities. And I think that's where some confusion is coming up. The intention of having a small scale was to note they're exempt from the requirement to have a conditional use permit. And it may be more straightforward just to call them accessory/personal systems. And that way it's not just the scale, it's actually the nature. And that would be a change that perhaps we should make just to remove the confusion. One comment suggested we set a limitation on the percent of land that could be covered with solar arrays. And I wasn't sure exactly. I think that would increase the area needed for the overall solar farms. I wasn't sure just how that would apply. One said to prioritize impervious surface or old landfills and Superfund sites. And that's a good idea. We don't have much impervious surface. I don't think that we have any Superfund sites in the unincorporated portion of the county. But places like that would be good places for these to go. And then recommended we set the height at no lower than 16 feet so that all solar farms would be able to have the agrivoltaic component. And so those are the new comments. I was just discussing them. To summarize them, we haven't made any changes based on them. And my recommendation or staff's recommendation would be to forward the text amendment with the revised draft language to the county commission with a recommendation for approval, or you could return it to us with direction for more changes if you'd like to see more changes to the language. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Luke Sinclair, Chair. We're going to take public comment now. There's no technical applicant on this, so we won't have an applicant response. And public comment is going to be limited to 3 minutes per person per our bylaws. I think that staff may have received a request to extend that. This is the second time that this particular matter has come to this commission. And we, I think, are going to have a lot more public comment tonight. And I think out of respect for everybody's time, we ought to keep it to 3 minutes. If there are members of the public, though, that are looking to combine their individual comment periods into one presentation, that's up to you. You can do that. And so with that, I guess I can just go down the list of the folks that I have noted being signed up, and then we can cover anybody else that isn't on the list. But I think the first people I have on my list are Alan Anderson, John Peterson and William Wilkins, and I'm just saying that out of memory. I think the three of you presented last time jointly, and so you're the first on my list, and I just turn it over to you if you have something for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. John Peterson with Poston LAPC. Having the pleasure tonight to be here on behalf of NextEra Energy Resources. As you indicated, Billy Wilkins, project director for NextEra, is with us, as well as my partner, Alan Anderson, a Douglas County resident and also the head of our energy group. And he's going to speak briefly in this allowed time slot as well. Staff, Mr. Chairman, did such an excellent job really highlighting the handful of issues that we would like some continued modifications to as the commission considers this set of regulations. I'll touch on them very, very quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Alan for some comments. Probably the one is size is probably the most important in the list, the 1,000 acre maximum requirement. And we would merely suggest, and we acknowledge, and we've had such a really positive professional exchange with staff in working through these regulations. We appreciate the fact that they highlighted exactly what the 1,000 acre means in terms of the exact coverage of the panels and the ability to seek a waiver from the county commission if we needed to exceed that 1,000. I think our point is this: to bring a state-of-the-art solar facility to Douglas County and to the entire MSA of this area, we will need more than 1,000 acres. We say that with the recognition that there are provisions in your regulations, which we have no argument with, that go to providing a quality project that addresses all of the important issues of the quality of the soils, preservation of natural features, all of those elements that are important and we're prepared to adhere to, but those eat up acres as well. So the idea of putting 1,000 acres, then we come and ask for an expansion, it's a bit of setting the realistic expectations of what a project would be. And we think, given the path we will be required to follow and want to follow to address all of the related environmental issues and how the project impacts surrounding properties, we trust the judgment through these regulations, ultimately the Board of County Commissioners, to decide on a case-by-case basis what is the appropriate size of a project. So with that is really just a restatement of what staff indicated was our position of not having a set acreage cap on the project. Setbacks you went through, I will just indicate in terms of battery storage, the regulations as drafted by staff, I will say sort of unilaterally just pick, for instance, a 500-foot setback for storage facilities. I know that probably goes to the issue of safety and being sure that there is proper treatment of such facilities. 500 feet is a long way. We would suggest, again, that we have a set of what the national standards have put forth in terms of siting a facility like this for safety concerns, all the other elements that go into it. They've been tested, reviewed, and researched, and we look forward to working with staff to maybe pull a few of those out, but then have that sort of as a tag on to the regulations for a conditional use permit in Douglas County. I know we're short on time, so I'm going to jump to the noise because that's an important one. 60 decibels is an aggressively conservative noise level, and that's okay. We can live with that. I deal with 60-foot decibels in a lot of development projects that I've been involved in. 60 decibels in the book, in the manual, if you read it, is right at the level of a normal human conversation. And so if my voice wasn't amplified when we're in a room together, that's 60 decibels. 60 decibels at the property line seems like a reasonable standard that if we could maintain that, it would not be disruptive to our neighbors, whether they were participating or not participating in the project. And finally, in terms of the one point of the decommissioning plan of the option of leaving some of our wires, as you know, all of these panels are connected underground by a series of wires. We replace those by trenching the ground, taking care to preserve the topsoils, replacing the topsoils. And much like other public utilities, water, sewers are allowed once it's determined that they're deep enough not to affect the reuse of the property, whether it be for commercial development or agricultural development, that they're deep enough and they themselves do not have any contaminants that could affect groundwater or anything to that degree. They're left in place as well. And we would just suggest that instead of having to retrench, take soils out again, if they're deep enough, 36 inches, we have determined anything below 36 inches, that we can go through that analysis and leave that part of the facility in place. It is not footings and foundations. We are not suggesting that those be left in place. So with that, and against the other comments by the professional staff, we'll finish our comments tonight by turning it over to my partner, Alan Anderson.
Great. Thanks, John. Alan Anderson with Polson LA, also working with NextEra Energy Resources. And I'm just going to touch on two major goals that Douglas County has stated within the comprehensive plan, or the Plan 2040. And the first is related to Section 4, ensuring a resilient future for our food system. And reading from that section, it's promoting the resilience of our agricultural future, which I think, as you heard, this project would serve as a land banking and preserve the soil, allow for recharging and agriculture into the future. But it specifically also says incentivize conservation. And just like other projects or programs that allow for soils, especially top quality soils, to be preserved in conservation and enhanced for the future, conservation is an important part of that. And that shouldn't be lost and it shouldn't be minimized. And that's specifically in Plan 2040. But also maintaining and protecting the lands and high quality agricultural soils for future generations. The threat to the soils of Douglas County has not been from a solar project, nor would it be, as that would conserve and preserve the land for future generations, but it's from other uses, residential and other items such as that. So as staff has stated, this would be similar to land banking discussed previously in the other meeting, and it would prepare these soils to be enhanced and allowed for these future generations in a way that really no other use can. And so the second point that Douglas County has stated in Plan 2040, and that is climate change mitigation and leadership. We don't have to look too far than the recent IPCC report that was put out that is stated that, and if we're going to believe in climate change, that we are pretty much locked into a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. But if we want to prevent the real harm that comes from an additional 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, we must move from fossil fuel generation and usage which is the greatest creator of greenhouse gas emissions, and transition to renewable energy. But the key part of that can't be lost is it must be much more renewable energy than we've done to date and a much faster pace. Those things are so critical to the climate change mitigation that we can't minimize how important it is to do that. So from a leadership standpoint, if Douglas County is going to place itself in a position of climate change leadership, it can't have anything resembling this 1,000-acre cap, because I can tell you the way that will be received. First of all, guarantee that we are not doing things to the scale or the pace that are necessary for climate change mitigation. But it'll also be used, and I can tell you from working on other projects, it'll be used by other places to say, well, gosh, if Douglas County says they're so pro renewables and pro GHG reduction, look what they did. And that'll be used. So we will not only not be a leader for positive in climate change, but we would, in fact, the reputational damage to Douglas County as a climate change mitigation leader would be significant. We would be the most restrictive solar ordinance in the state by a large margin. And I don't think we want to minimize that impact. And I know Dr. Ruman has prepared a report that it gets into this from a much more scientific basis. But he states that if we have that kind of cap on acreage, that we should probably be construed as exacerbating the climate crisis and being part of the problem rather than the solution. So I can tell you this will be utilized in a negative way, and I don't want to minimize that impact. So With that, I'll end my comments. We were also, and I'm happy to talk about the report that was presented that was actually published in a chemical and fertilizer company and is not allowed to be utilized and has patently wrong facts within it. But I'm happy to talk about that if it's necessary. And obviously, between Mr. Wilkins and Mr. Peterson, we're also available for comments, as needed through the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Peterson. Luke Sinclair, Chair. I'm sure there will be questions if there was anything else you wanted to talk about. I guess Daniel Ruman is the next person I have on my list. Mr. Ruman, did you have any additional comments to make?
Yes, thank you. Can everyone see my screen?
I think
so. The basic point I want to make, Alan already alluded to it, is just the fact that some of these setbacks and limitations in size might be easily construed as counterproductive to some of Douglas County's missions, just because of the fact that climate change is actually the biggest threat to agriculture and rural landscapes in Douglas County. My name is Dan Ruman. I'm a professor and senior scientist at KU. And I just want to direct everyone to the report that I submitted if you want more detail. Also happy to answer questions. So the basic logic of my argument here is that these size limits and setbacks, which I'm happy to see that some of them are being reviewed already, they were seemingly proposed originally motivated by preserving agriculture and rural character of unincorporated Douglas County, which are worthy goals for sure, but actually climate change is the biggest threat to agriculture in Douglas County, and I'll give a little evidence of that in a few minutes. The best way to preserve agriculture is probably actually to fight climate change with everything that we've got by promoting large-scale renewables being one of the best ways. Douglas County also already has a climate change mitigation as a goal. So excessive size limits and excessive setbacks on solar farms are actually counterproductive to these goals. So I just want to emphasize what many people have already heard something about, and that's the extreme urgency of climate change as a global problem to limit consequences to less disastrous levels. By less disastrous, I mean still disastrous, just less bad than it would be if it goes above this level. We have to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is difficult at this point. In order to do it, the IPCC has projected in their recent sixth assessment report that we have to halve global emissions over the next 10 years. That's an amazingly short period of time, given that it takes 5 years to build one of these solar farms, to do the whole planning process and everything. Then we have to zero out emissions entirely by 2050. So it's quite urgent. And this is just still bad things about climate change will happen. This is just to avoid the worst of it. Climate change is the largest threat to agriculture in Douglas County and to the rural character of Douglas County. And I'll give some examples from some reports here. There's a report from the EPA from 2016 called What Climate Change Means for Kansas. So it's a specific report to Kansas. And here are a few quotes from it. Changing climate is likely to increase the demand for water, but make it less available. Soils have become drier and they're likely to continue to become drier. Average rainfall during the summer is likely to decrease. These are all things that sort of manifestly are going to influence agriculture in Douglas County and the rural character of Douglas County. Here's another example, a recent high-profile report from researchers out of Kansas State published in Nature Communications, which identified that crop yield risks will increase with warmer temperatures, reducing the economic viability of farming in Kansas. And there's details on both of those in the report. Here is a set of pie charts from that paper from Nature Communications that I just mentioned, that they worked out the crop loss indemnity payments by cause in Kansas over the last 10 or 20 years. You can see the red and blue here correspond to excessive precipitation and drought. So about 75% of these crop loss indemnity payments were due to extreme variability in rainfall, and it's well known to scientists that variability is something that will be exacerbated by climate change. Variability in precipitation Probably most of you can already tell that that's happening by the extreme rain events that have been happening in Douglas County for the last few years.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Mr. Ruman, if you wouldn't mind wrapping up, we're past the 3 minutes, and as a group, you guys have exceeded the 9 for sure.
Well, I have one more slide, which is just specific recommendations, which are to scrap or greatly increase the 1,000-acre size limit and reduce the setbacks, which I'm already happy to see the setbacks are being reconsidered. That's all.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ruman. And just to reiterate, before moving on to the next public commenter, we will surely have questions for commenters during the discussion section. So even if I cut you off, I apologize. I'm not trying to be mean. The next individual I have listed, though, is Michael Allman. Michael Allman, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. This is Michael Allman. And I see we have capability of sharing screen.
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services. Michael, you should be able to share your screen if we've got everything properly set.
Okay, I will as I need. Thank you. I'm speaking for the Sustainability Action Network. It's a not-for-profit here in Lawrence, Kansas. NextEra and Savion are requesting lax siting criteria because they claim to already operate by high standards and need no restrictions for riparian corridors, wildlife corridors, or sensitive lands. Savion goes so far as to say they want no upper limit on size because they follow the project size needs of the regional transmission power pool. I'm sure what they say about their self-imposed limits is true. So they want you to minimize siting criteria. Trust us, they say. However, there are only 2 problems with that scenario. First, they're in business to make a profit, which is commendable. And like any business that adheres to a fiduciary responsibility for shareholder profit, if faced with a choice of an environmentally sound design or making a profit, which do you think they'll choose? Second, the standards you are devising will not apply to only one site or one project or one business. This amendment will be for all of Douglas County and for any future solar projects by any company. It's impossible to predict if the next company will apply rigorous standards to themselves. It's up to the Planning Commission to adopt standards that protect our farmland and food security while permitting solar electric projects. We need resilient farm soils right now that can withstand heat, drought, and flooding from climate destabilization. And we need solar electricity that will mitigate climate disruption, as the previous speakers have indicated. A climate solution would be foolhardy, though, if it promoted the solar aspect of that, but ignored the food production aspect. As we explained in our letter, solar and farming can partner through agrivoltaics, food production underneath the solar arrays. By keeping land productive while adding solar arrays spaced at less than 100% density, a landowner can enjoy a return on investment up to a 60% increase. Don't be distracted by solar that prevents food production with the promise of preserving the land for the future. We need that food production now. It's also highly unlikely that in 30 years, the solar arrays will be decommissioned. Solar efficiency has advanced to around 22% today, but prototypes are at 29.8% and even 44.5% efficient. In 30 years, NextEra will surely replace the old panels with new panels that double the efficiency and make double the profit going forward. Those arrays are not going away. The land will remain covered. In our markup text amendment, we recommend prohibiting solar on capability 1 and 2 soils, a 500-acre maximum size, but by incentivizing agrivoltaics with a size premium of 1,000 acres. And remember that in the permit process, a waiver can be applied for. Prioritizing projects on CRP land on rooftops, on retired landfills or Superfund sites, or other places other than prime farmland. The largest...
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Mr. Allman, I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish up your thoughts, if you will.
Yes, I will. Can you all see that? The largest project in NextEra's portfolio is 300 megawatts, and the average is 88.6 megawatts, or only 700 acres. 3,500 acre, 500 megawatt projects are only to maximize their profit and are not preordained by the market. Kansas is a ripe plum for solar. With the rise in solar efficiencies and a precipitous drop in costs, developers will be flocking here. It's a seller's market, so don't hesitate to state your terms. Thank you.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Allman. The next individual from the public I have listed is Marcy Francisco. Are you on the line, Ms. Francisco?
I am. Have I unmuted?
Yep, we can hear you.
Chairman Sinclair and members of the Planning Commission. First off, apologies for coming late to this discussion, and my thanks for all the good work that has been done up to this point on the text amendment for commercial and utility scale solar energy conversion systems by the commissioners and by the staff. I want you to know that I am so appreciative. Your work will allow our county to provide an opportunity for renewable energy that many of the residents want. I'm especially pleased that accommodations were made in the amendment for both retaining the topsoil and for accommodating battery storage. Really, with the idea of battery storage, we can look at shaving the peak. So my specific comments were in regard to the size, and this is 12-306-49.04D. And I see that the staff is suggesting that the 1,000 acre limit be maintained, but that the Board of County Commissioners may modify that condition on a case-by-case basis. So I appreciate the explanation of what's included in the 1,000 acre limit. That makes me feel a little better because it is just the arrays themselves. And I recognize the concern we all have to protect prime farmland in this county. However, since there can be any number of such installations, I don't see how the size of each one will limit the overall impact on agricultural land. It may make more sense for the commission to identify land that should not have any built structures at all, rather than try to set maximums for particular projects. I also want to say that the more the rules are written to be applied uniformly, the easier a job, or the easier we've made the job for our elected officials. So I was interested to hear the earlier comments and suggest maybe that proposal of 2,000 acres or something in between could make more sense. But again, thank you all for addressing this, and thanks for all the good work that I've seen thus far.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Francisco. The next person I have on my list is Dan Fuller. Mr. Fuller, are you on the line?
I'm here.
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services. Mr. Chair, the gentleman is in the room to speak on the items.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the microphone's on. Okay, all right. They're talking about the soils, and the stability on them. The soil in this area that we're talking about, this 1,000 acres, is Sibleyville soil. It's highly erodible. It's sandy. It has the water depth of about 15 foot where the water table is, right below the sandstone structure. So it's going to be very hard for them to not contaminate this soil when they go in to do herbicides, especially if they use Tordon. Tordon will go right down. Kansas City Power and Light was sued about 40 years ago for Tordon contamination because they spread it underneath their power lines to get rid of the brush. So that's something that you guys have to keep in mind. At this site where they're talking about is the Sibleyville soil, and it's highly erodible. With these solar panels being at certain angles of the day, if you get rain, there's going to be a drip edge, just like on the side of your house. And that soil is going to erode maybe 4 or 5 inches deep, depending on the amount of rain we get. So, and it'll take a while before they get any vegetation growth below those panels. So it's highly erodible. The temperature around the perimeter of these solar farms, and actually it's a solar industrial complex, it's not a solar farm, can raise the air temperature 5 to 7 degrees around the outside perimeter. Well, you get a wind blowing. If some house is within 500 foot, their temperature is going to go up. So that's going to increase their cooling bill in the summertime. Also, how's that going to do with that temperature rise on those panels? How's that going to affect our rainfall there as far as is the rain going to evaporate before it hits the ground? Or what subsoil moisture is in the ground, is that going to evaporate also? I've heard, I haven't seen, but I've heard where it can almost be a little desert around these because it does affect the weather conditions around these. I've also heard that planes can't fly over these. They have a reflective, where they reflect back up into the atmosphere. So they have to avoid it. They have to kind of fly around this general area. Also, this ground that we're talking about is by absentee landowners. They don't live here. So if they don't live here, they don't worry about what's happening to the neighbors around. There are 3 agricultural tourist locations in this general area. They raise specialty crops. How's this going to affect their business? That's something else that you guys have to consider. I think that you should slow down and check these out. Take your time. Don't vote on this right away. You have to investigate all these problems that can arise from this stuff. The herbicide use is really scary because these specialty crops, if they use anything that has a volatile ester in it, it's going to volatilize when the temperature gets up above 76, 78 degrees. And then you have a cloud and it's going to drift. Douglas County got sued about 20 years ago because they sprayed 2,4-D and it wiped out a vineyard and orchard out by Overbrook. So these chemicals, who's going to apply them? Does Nextra have an employee, or is it going to be a contractor? How do you know if that contractor's licensed to put down those chemicals? There's a lot of things that you guys have to consider before you vote on this. And also, why does a big company like this have to have 4 LLCs? I'll tell you why they have to have 4 LLCs. Because if they're sued, they have to go through 3 LLCs to get to the last LLC that has the money. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Next person I have on the list is Dorothy Barnett. Ms. Barnett, are you on the line or in person?
I'm here on the line. Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Planning Commission members. I'm Dorothy Barnett, Executive Director of the Climate and Energy Project. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with our organization, we are the leading climate and energy nonprofit in Kansas, providing education, outreach, and advocacy around clean energy and equitable carbon decarbonization since 2007. We were actually started right there in Lawrence. When the wind industry was emerging 15 years ago, our team educated ourselves using peer-reviewed science-based information and in consultation with colleagues throughout the Midwest to become Kansas experts on technology, siting, manufacturing policy, and regulations of wind. For the past 5 years, we've been leading the advocacy on distributed generation like rooftop solar at the state legislature and the Kansas Corporation Commission. We're in the process of getting up to speed on all things utility scale solar, as that is an important emerging industry for Kansas. Many have covered the latest IPCC report, so I'll move straight into what we must do in light of the climate disaster we're facing. The IEA, International Energy Association's Net Zero by 2050 report calls for scaling up solar and wind rapidly in this decade, reaching annual additions of 630 gigawatts of solar PV and 390 gigawatts of wind by 2030. That's 4 times the record levels that were set in 2020. For solar PV, this is the equivalent of installing the world's current largest solar park roughly every day for the next 10 years. We cannot get where we need to be in this climate battle without large-scale utility solar. I've reviewed the latest draft of your solar regulations, and I am concerned that they do not reflect the leadership that I know Douglas County and Lawrence strive for. I'm specifically concerned with the proposed 1,000-acre cap. While there has been some attempts to mitigate it, it still is not aligned with the current state of the industry. According to the Southwest Power Pool, which is our regional grid manager, solar interconnection requests are getting larger. The SPP data indicates that after this year, there would likely be no solar projects in their queue small enough to build in Douglas County under a 1,000-acre cap. Additionally, we are a participant in Evergy's integrated resource plan, where they're deciding what they're going to do for the next 15 years. And their publicly available data indicates that they plan to add 3,200 megawatts of solar between 2023 and 2032. If the most climate-friendly county in the state sets a solar acre cap, I'm not sure how we will ever make the transition that we're all pushing Evergy to make. I want to leave you with one thought. How do Douglas County regulations line up with the home of Koch Industries, Sedgwick County? Well, let me tell you, their regulations do not have an acreage cap. They have reasonable setbacks. They do not have a noise limit. The city of Wichita is discussing a climate action plan following in your footsteps. And the county will soon adopt a food policy plan to take advantage of their rich agricultural land. Sedgwick County understands that a solar project located on agricultural ground preserves and enhances the soil for future agricultural uses and can serve as protection against other potential competing uses. This preservation and enhancement of the agriculture ground allows for resilient food systems long into the future. As you discuss your solar regulations tonight, I hope you will find a path forward that helps meet the climate challenge and shows the climate leadership that I know you strive for. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Ms. Barnett. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Next person on my list is Corinne Pagel-Miners, and I apologize if I totally just butchered your name. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. No, that was pretty close. My name is Karen Pagel-Miners. I'm chair of the Wakarusa Group, which is the local Sierra Club group in the Lawrence and Baldwin areas. Zach Pistora will be giving the official Sierra Club position, and I don't want to take up time repeating things. So I want to first of all commend the Planning Commission and staff for the thoroughness and thoughtfulness of the proposed text amendment, which could well serve as model standards for other counties. And so that, that. And then I have basically just some questions and small things to add. For the, I guess one question, and I'm just a little bit out of my depth here on the building permits. Are building permit codes adequate for pertinent facilities, or is there something unique about solar arrays and the other buildings that we need to address? Mary already suggested something to that effect. So that's just, it sounds like that is being looked at. My other question is on gravel. There's no gravel, right? That seems to be the implication, but gravel would be bad because that's just really hard to move on from. One thing I would request under the application and required documents under existing conditions, B, existing conditions, and under 3, the location and size of any abandoned or current wells, and then in parentheses you have oil, water, geothermal, etc., is to specifically add injection wells. I realize that injection wells would probably be covered under etc., but because of the unique problems or potential problems of injection wells, whether they are plugged or unplugged, monitored or unmonitored, it might be good to insert specifically them in either item number 3 or give them their own line. And then under standards, let's see, that's the, there are lots of suggestions for ways to mitigate that are not, I think it's worded under the standards for farmland. There's 4 examples under the such as, and I would have more items under that, but that might be best saved for when individual applications come in. One final question is, how long does it take to get a solar farm up and running? I guess I'm just curious about that. So any other time I will hand over to Zach if he needs a little bit longer. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Luke Sinclair, Chair. I suppose then, Mr. Pastora, did you want to present now?
Yeah, be happy to. Thank you, commissioners. Good evening. Appreciate the opportunity to supply a public comment on behalf of Sierra Club, one of the oldest and largest grassroots environmental organizations in the country. We have about 5,000 members across the great state of Kansas, 583 dues-paying members in Douglas County, and 861 supporters in the county. I happen to live in a rural area just outside the county, so all this discussion is meaningful to me personally. The Sierra Club is proud to uphold its mission to educate and enlist humanity to protect and restore both the quality of the human and natural environments. We care about people and communities, the ecosystems, and the natural resources that are fundamentals to life as we know it. But as you know, sadly, our livelihoods and natural ecosystems are being threatened by the severe effects of climate change from human-produced greenhouse gases and the rapid pollution of the atmosphere. As Professor Ruman and as well as the United Nations report articulated well, climate change is dire, it's upon us, and requires an urgent and scaled response. Thus, we advocate for 100% clean energy by 2030 and support a variety of means to get there, including large-scale solar. We are here today to offer our support for the responsible solar development in Douglas County as you laid out. Large-scale solar projects are a key solution here, and it's clear by Douglas County's planning proposed regulations that it's clear to you that also the interest of protecting topsoil, agricultural opportunities, trees, water bodies, next door neighbors, and other environmental interests are important. The regulations we see here strike a balance of economic and environmental interests to serve the public and invite much needed investment into solar in the county. With that in mind, we do have some suggestions to make your regulations even better. First, let me say that low impact solar design is the way to go. It's keeps topsoil intact, promotes native vegetation underneath the panels, and it's likely to be the premier standard of large scale solar going forward. Let me tell you why. Department of Energy's research has showed that by keeping vegetation and native vegetation specifically underneath the solar panels, we can be able to produce food, retain water and soil in a better way, and even reduce costs for the developers. Rather than utilizing turf grass or gravel under the solar arrays, we can utilize these low impact kind of sustainable designs to avoid expenses from excavation and ground clearing, but also soil erosion, mowing, and spraying. And even flourishing vegetation can even boost renewable energy from the solar panels because it cools the panels off with increased evaporation and ground shading. So we would encourage that. Agrivoltaics is also promising, but we wouldn't write that into the regulations as we would basic low impact solar design that you've incorporated from our view into the standards. Important that we shouldn't be in the business of over-regulating landowners and developers in solar siting. You provide a great minimum basic standards for critical energy transformation, but we should not disallow the opportunity for farmers or other landowners on top prime farmland to be able to harvest a solar crop. Okay, we're lucky to have a lot of prime farmland in Douglas County, but we also have a great solar resource. So we should respect the property rights and market ambitions for both. And you heard that, right now you could argue that there's a more critical harvest for humanity in agriculture, and that's dealing with the climate change issue. A couple more points. We suggest deleting the 1,000 acre project maximum. It's all about the quality of the project. That would negate any harm from the quantity. It's kind of like overeating when you're doing fruits and vegetables. Like you can't really overeat healthy food that's good for you. In the way here, such an arbitrary limit of 1,000 acres could reduce the economic benefits for the county, for the landowners, and reduce the profitability and drive up costs for the scale solar developers. And while we're not necessarily interested in profitability, right, as an environmental organization, when it comes to profitability as the means to expedite and expand the renewable energy transformation, that's a great thing, right? So we would encourage that. Get rid of the 1,000 acre limit to help ensure that.
Mr. Pastor,
those are the main. Yep.
Luke Sinclair,
I was just going to say, at your service. Just can't express our gratitude enough for these responsible, thoughtful planning regulations. Appreciate it.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Pastora. The next person on my list is Penny Von Aken. Are you on the line here, ma'am?
I am on the line. I hadn't planned to speak, however.
Okay. Luke Sinclair, Chair. If you don't want to say anything about this, that's fine. Maybe I was incorrect about my list.
I would, since you called on me, I would state one thing, though. I would hope that you would think as a planning commission very carefully before you would allow them to keep their wires and cables underground. We don't know in 30 or 60 years when those are pulled, when those solar arrays are going to be removed, of what kind of problems that would create. I would really, it shouldn't be turned into a landfill. I would really hope that you require them to remove everything underground when they leave that. Thank you. And thank you to Mary Miller for an excellent job on writing these standards.
Thank you, ma'am. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Those are the people I had on my list. Is there anybody else on the Zoom call that would like to make any comments?
This is Becky Pepper, Planning Manager. I'm not seeing any raised hands on the Zoom, but we do have individuals here in the City Commission room.
Luke Sinclair, Chair, thank you. Then any individuals in the room there, if you'd like to make comments, please go ahead and step up. And if you wouldn't mind stating your name for everybody on the call.
My name's Alan England, and some of what I prepared is redundant to what's been talked about so far, so I'll change course here. We have, in the United States, we have 333 million people. Over the next 20 years, that's forecast to grow by 40 million. Globally, the United Nations predicts world population will grow by another 1.4 billion in that same 20-year period. We'll be approaching 10 billion people. So this population is going to need food. And you all are rightfully concerned about prime farmland. I had the good fortune some time ago to talk with some people who are in the solar development industry, and they're not ones that are represented here. And I was asking them, what can I expect if I have a solar facility next door? One of the things they said during the construction period, you can expect that there'll be a lot of earth moved, AKA that's also topsoil. That it'll be moved, it'll be dusty, there'll be congestion, there'll be traffic, there'll be runoff when it rains, and that'll be substantial. Now, I ask you to consider, while there won't be any removal of topsoils by the solar companies because you've got that written in your regulations, it'll go off, it will be removed. It'll be removed in the wind, it'll be removed in the rain. So think about that and consider that in your guidelines. With climate change, there's a lot of places in this United States that's becoming more arable as a result of climate change. A lot of great places to put solar. Eliminating the food supply for a period of 30 to 60 years, I don't think is a good solution. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Other members of the public that wish to make a comment?
Hi, my name's Travis Hardy. I live out there where this is, going to take place. And we keep talking about this 1,000 acres. And let's be clear, it's not 1,000 acres. Johnson County has over 2,000 acres involved in this. So we're talking, over 3,000 acres involved in this, process. We keep hearing about, climate change, which is a huge problem. But I haven't heard anybody talk about what's going to be done to protect us, people living out there, just going to have to deal with this. I mean, I moved out in the country because I like being out there. I like seeing animals. I didn't move out there. I want to see solar panels. My property value is going to go down. I mean, bottom line. And so who's going to protect me from that? My biggest asset I have is my house. And I'm going to, lose. I'm going to lose out of this deal. I don't know what I'm going to get because we've heard from NextEra, power's going in the grid. So we're not even going to get the benefit of the power here, which is a bummer, right? So I'm trying to figure out, what's being done for us. I mean, we're the ones that on a day-to-day basis, we're going to be out there dealing with this. I mean, like what's already been said, these farmers that are, giving this land up, they're going to be making money, but they're not even out there to deal with this. So it's real easy for them to say, oh yeah, sure, take my land, use it, pay me, the amount of money you're going to pay me, and out of sight, out of mind. But I'm just asking, for us, it's a way of life out there. I mean, we like being out there because, we don't live in town. It'd be nice, to think about that instead of, all the other stuff as well. I mean, what's going to happen for me? Am I going to want to stay out there? Probably not. If I'm looking at solar panels all day, if the temperature is going to rise, these aren't things that I enjoy. Heck, I haven't heard anything, we talk about a big fence, there's wildlife across the road from me now. There's corn crop, deer walking through there. I like seeing stuff like that. Well, what's going to happen to the wildlife? There's been mention of possibly, walk through areas and stuff, but if you're taking away the crops, and it's going to heat up the air, these animals are going to move away. I mean, they're going to go somewhere where this isn't. I mean, it's going to have an impact. There's definitely downsides to this. And I just hope that, when you guys are thinking about this, you think about us out there as well. And, hopefully, I don't want to pass this flat out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Other members of the public there that wish to speak, go ahead and step up to the podium.
Thank you, council, members, everybody. My name is Martin Belcher. I am a landowner, small landowner in that area. And to reiterate what everybody else has said here, I don't want to look out my living room window and see a reflection of solar panels. It's just that simple. I do believe that 1,000 acres is God's plenty, because you have already gone to Johnson County and they're pretty much on board. Hopefully you folks will reconsider everything. My opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, there's better places for this. The lake is one. I have not heard anybody say an alternative place for this 1,000 acre property or project, excuse me. You've already got a buffer zone in that area if you was to talk to the Corps or whoever owns that property out there. You build it right in the center of all those trees. Who's affected? The water will go off into the lake area and help provide drinking water for the city of Lawrence and other areas. I agree. Our property values are going to diminish. I've heard a lot of talk about row crop. Nobody's mentioned row crop, but agricultural. But nobody specifically said anything about livestock. There's a lot of ranchers in our area that depend on livestock for their living. They've worked hard. I've worked hard all my life to get what we've got. I would hope that the commission who voted on this sustainable food production for that area here just in the past 3 to 6 months will remember how they voted and give it some deep thought to this. Would you want to live in that area yourself? No. When I first heard of this, I told my wife, hey, that's it. I'm packing up and moving out. But she's changed my mind. There's too many advantages, but there's a lot of disadvantages of living there. Another issue, somebody said something about gravel. I'll try not to go over 3 minutes, and I'm getting close. The infrastructure out there is terrible. Who's going to maintain the roads or dust control, things of that nature? I've got a million other things that's listed here, but I'll respect your 3 minutes. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Belcher. Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner, or Planning Chair, sorry. Any other members of the public that wish to say anything in there?
My name is Sue Enright, and I don't want to repeat what a lot of the others have said, but my main concern is it seems like a lot of other people knew about this meeting, but all the people that were going to be affected that live around the area, we weren't told. We had no idea this was going on. Luckily, someone found out and started calling all the rest of us. We would like to know the list of the chemicals that will be used, and again, who's responsible for the application. We cannot stress enough about this chemical use, the chemical drifting, and the runoff. We are already a no spray sensitive crop area. We have varieties of plants inside and outside of our greenhouse. Also, there's neighboring grape fields and vegetable fields growing within a mile. And to say again, we have sandy soil. All 4 of our wells the water enters at a 24 to 40 foot level. Years ago, a power company contaminated our well. We received no help from Douglas County or the state of Kansas concerning the misuse of this chemical. We're wondering who's going to protect us now. It took 10 years for that chemical to be flushed out of our well. Who will be responsible 30 years from now as far as cleaning this up when it's not in use? Are the solar complex companies going to be responsible for the mess, or will they pull out and leave it for us? Who will put it back the way it was in the beginning? Please put yourself in our shoes. Is this something you want to look across from the street from your home? Think about us too. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Enright. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Any other members of the public there in the chambers that wish to comment?
Good evening. My name is Richard Lundstrom. I live in Lawrence. I'm concerned, however, I also was only made aware of this issue very recently, and so I'm not really up to speed on everything that's gone before. I don't think, however, that the equities balance very well for the development of larger scale solar in Douglas County. The reason being, Douglas County's not a huge county. It's one of a handful of counties with an increasing population these days in Kansas. And we do have a number of areas with sensitive soils. I think what Ms. Francisco and what Mr. Fuller said earlier combined suggests that there ought to be some kind of zoning whereby this kind of development might be allowed some places and not others, based in part on soil type, and not just the agricultural use of the soil, but the erosibility of the soil. A lot of the argument in favor of developing solar energy around here is probably mostly a feel-good argument. That is to say that we ought to lead. Well, I don't know that this sort of race to the bottom for using large tracts of land in a limited area under a lot of development pressure is necessarily a really. I don't know that this kind of industrial development is really a very good use here when we've got a lot of areas of the state that are losing population and are losing their access to water for agricultural purposes. I had a lot of things I was interested in saying, but I wanted to cut past a lot of that because I see that a lot of it's already been addressed. I just fear that we're losing sight of the environmental equities here. There may be other, and basically, if we do keep 1,000-acre or smaller cap on the size of these developments, it may point to the power companies that this might not be the place and the time for those projects. Some point they may be able to have profitable projects on parcels small enough, but I don't think at this point they really can. And so it just might point to better viability of their projects in other counties. And consequently, I think the Planning Commission needs to stand its ground on that and protect the rights of people whose interests here are already at stake, as opposed to those of people from other places who do not have a long-term vested interest in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lundstrom. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Other members of the public, feel free to step to the podium.
Becky Pepper, Planning Manager. Oh, we do have someone else coming to the podium.
Hello, my name's Mike Young. I just heard about this from one of my neighbors a couple of days ago. Like I said, it's kind of been kept secret from a lot of us that live right there. I don't know. I have not seen a map or any of that because I just learned of it. I don't know how much land around me it's going to take in, but from what my neighbor tells me, I'm going to be dead center of it, and it's going to be on all four sides of me. And this does not make me happy. My land, what it's worth, is going to go down in value tremendously. And I moved out in the country, out in that area, because I got bought out by the intermodal when it went in at Gardner and was forced to move. And now it's looking like I'm going to be forced to move again because I'm going to be in the middle of a solar farm. So it's not a good thing as far as I'm seeing it. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Are there any other commenters in the chambers that wish to speak?
Becky Pepper, Planning Manager. There do not appear to be any others to speak.
Thank you, Becky. Luke Sinclair, Chair. I guess last call for anybody on the Zoom call for public comment.
Becky Pepper, Planning Manager. I don't see any raised hands on the Zoom call.
Thank you, Becky. Luke Sinclair, Chair. At this time, then, I guess we would bring it back to the commission to discuss. Before doing so, though, I want to just see, is there any commissioner that is willing or wanting to have a break now before we have a discussion, or do we want to push forward and take a break between this and our study session on NPO? Commissioner Ashworth?
This might take a while, so I would suggest a break now before the change of topic.
Okay. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Why don't we then take a 5-minute break before discussing it, and everyone, if you can be back by about 8:11 or 8:12, that'd be great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the room is ready when you are.
Thank you, Jeff. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen in the chambers, maybe you could start making your way back to your seats, and we can start having a discussion. And hopefully, commissioners will slowly make their way back to the cameras.
Solar panels.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments. Now's the time where the commissioners will discuss amongst ourselves the agenda item, taking into account the comments you've made, and may have questions for some of you. So please do stick around. So this is the second time this particular matter has been in front of us. We talked about it in June, and some changes have been made. I'm guessing commissioners may have additional thoughts on the changes that were made or on other items. So who wants to get the ball rolling? Commissioner Willie.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. As you might guess, I will have a lot to say at some point, but I'd like us to just back up a step and have Mary explain what we're doing here tonight, which is talking about regulations for any solar project that might come to Douglas County versus what would happen if a specific project came and the CUP process, which would be a full public process with maps and neighbor notification. Mary, could you talk to us about that?
Mary Miller, planner. Yes, thank you, Karen. That's it seems there is a little confusion. Today, we're trying to set standards for these commercial utility scale energy conversion systems. Technically, they would fall under utilities, and if someone submitted an application today, we could process it. We just wouldn't have any standards. We'd have to develop them all as we go through the CUP process. So as we spoke with people who were interested in maybe pursuing solar energy in Douglas County, we let them know that we would like to be able to develop standards first. It'll make it simpler for everyone. It'll be a better product in the end. So what we're doing right now is trying to develop standards for any commercial or utility grade scale solar energy conversion systems. It's not tied to one particular project. And so if NextEra was interested in a project, or Savion, or if someone else came in and decided to move ahead with a project, they would have to submit an application, and then it would be reviewed 20 days before it goes to the Planning Commission. We would notify neighbors within a half a mile. It's a mailed notice, and there's a sign posting. There's a legal notice in the newspaper. And the actual regulations that we're writing right now require them to notify everyone within a mile before they even submit the application. So these standards would provide greater notification. So once the standards go through, if an application comes in, then people would be notified both before the application is submitted and then again before the Planning Commission, so people would know that they could provide comments and what the date of the Planning Commission meeting is. So.
Thank you, Mary. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Willie, do you have a follow-up?
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. Thank you very much, Mary. I think that will help. It's also, just to reiterate, it's super important that anyone who feels like they're going to be impacted by a future project that may be a specific project, be here and comment like you did as we're making the regulations. But just so that you know that if anything specific comes forward that's within a mile of your property, you would get a letter in the mail about a specific meeting, and you would get to be heard again. So I'm really glad to just make that clear for people.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Very good question. And thank you, Mary, for talking about that. Commissioner Willie, do you want to just offer any of your other thoughts while you sort of have the floor here? Or do you want to, up to you.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I'll throw another one out. Mary, can you address the 1,000-acre cap versus 1,000 acres per project? So I believe we're talking about not 1,000 acres for the county, but 1,000 acres for each project that would come forward through the public process. So the same company could bring a second project back at 1,000 acres and ask again. Is that correct?
Mary Miller, planner. That is correct. And in some of our early drafts, we looked at setting like a 3-mile separation between facilities. However, we don't know that large facilities are going to be the only application. We could get a 10-acre solar farm application, and then requiring 3 miles before the next one would really hinder it, So we backed off from having the separation requirement, but the 1,000 acres is per project.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Ashworth?
Sharon Ashford, Planning Commission. A couple more clarifying points now that Commissioner Willie's brought up the 1,000 acres. So this is a project, 1,000 acres total. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's a continuous 1,000 acres for a project. And also in terms of that 1,000 acres, that is any type of land we're talking about. It's not necessarily a cap on prime farmland or any other category of land. It's just simply 1,000 acres. And it doesn't necessarily have to be continuous. Is that correct?
Mary Miller, planner. That's right. It does not need to be contiguous. A lot of times they'll have woodlands or streams they have to deal with. So we would want them to divide it in order to protect them. So it does not need to be contiguous. In order to be efficient, I think they'd like to be as close together as possible, but it's not required to be contiguous at all. And you're right, it is just for any type of land, 1,000 acres cap. So anything under the solar arrays, regardless of what type of land it is.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Carpenter. Oh, sorry. Well, first, Commissioner Carpenter, before you go, Commissioner Willie, did you have anything to add or talk about on the acreage? No? Okay. Sorry. Commissioner Carpenter.
Well, I'd like, Jim Carpenter, Planning Commission, I'd like to further clarify this 1,000 acres. We've heard reference that this is actually the ground underneath the solar arrays. Or can you just, what ground is included in the 1,000 acres and what additional ground is actually needed to get 1,000 acres of solar arrays if that's how we're measuring it?
Mary Miller, planner. It's the area under the solar arrays. And so when you look at the solar arrays, when they stand straight up, they angle. So we would draw a perimeter around the solar arrays. And if they are separated, you would just use an aerial drawing, and the area within the soil arrays, not the access drives, not vegetated buffer yards around them. We're just looking at what's under the solar panel, the solar arrays, and that's what we would use for our 1,000 acres.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. So in essence, what we're saying is a particular solar project could be several thousand acres out of agricultural productivity to get to 1,000 acres of solar panels. Is that correct?
Mary Miller, planner. Basically, I don't think it would be that many acres. I don't think they'd want to put in unnecessary access roads just to expand their project. Usually being condensed is much more efficient, but they could probably explain that better. We just wanted to make sure we were able to protect environmentally sensitive lands without infringing on their area. So we have two values. We want them to avoid wetlands, stream corridors, and not to go in and clear cut trees. And with wetlands and some stream corridors, we have some provisions. We don't really have any strong provisions for trees. So some of the environmental protection standards are pretty voluntary. So in order to get them, we want to protect environmentally sensitive lands, and we want to allow them room for their solar arrays. And that's why we're keeping those out of the area. I think you're saying if they just decided to fence off a huge area, for instance, setbacks, if we require setbacks, we would not count that in the 1,000. So having smaller setbacks would reduce the size. We just want to make sure we have large enough setbacks to do the job.
Okay, Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. So I can't recall ever seeing a conditional use permit that wasn't a contiguous plot of land that we were considering. So if we're talking about getting to 1,000 acres, we're going over streams, we're going over roads. When a conditional use permit for one of these facilities come forward, is this going to be one big block, whatever shape it is, that all touches each other, or are we going to skip with parcels? I mean, how does that work as far as a conditional use permit?
Yeah, Mary Miller, planner. When a conditional use permit application comes in, and you'll see the legal description, we use the entire parcel. So if they have 5 acres on a 40-acre parcel, the CUP is going to note 40 acres. So you may have a 5,000 acre CUP just because maybe they bumped 5 acres onto several. I don't think it'd be that big, but because we want to notify neighbors. And if you only use the small portion that they are on that property, when you notify a certain distance, you're going to miss a lot of people. So we always use the established parcel, regardless of how much of it they use. And that is when we do the CUP and we say this is this many acres, but then we always say, this is the amount of acreage that's actually being used for the use. And we do that quite a lot. We've done 80-acre farms where they just wanted to put an industrial scale. They had a little factory kind of thing in a shed. So it was 80 acres. That was listed on the CUP application. We notified everybody around the 80 acres, but their actual use was only 2 acres because that's where their building was. And that's how you would treat this. And you're right, we seldom do things that extend over road right-of-ways. But in this case, the size of the project, we would. And I think with wind farms, it was probably the same way because a lot of wind farms might jump road right-of-ways as well.
Thank you, Mary.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Willie.
Just wanted to give a little context for 1,000 acres in Douglas County. So I serve on our rural fire department, so we get to go to a lot of grass fires. So I have a pretty good understanding of who has large acreages in Douglas County, and I only know of 2 landowners, and Tanya could probably run this for another meeting if we wanted, that have plots, individual parcels or contiguous ownership that is 800 acres. No more. So one of the larger farmers in the county that farmer ranchers that I ranch with, manages about 3,000 acres between owned and leased land, and that's in about 25 different parcels. So I think realistically what we'd be talking about, and I'm happy for any of the folks from NextEra or anyone else to weigh in on this, would be an 80-acre parcel here, maybe 160-acre parcel here, and smaller parcels beyond that. So the 1,000-acre project of what's under the solar panels would be a lot of parcels, not just a few. So if anybody else wants to comment on that, that's my take. Looks like Tanya might.
Hi, Tanya Voigt, Zoning Director. I think it's also important to think about that a lot of the property owners, not all, but there will be property owners that will be non-participating, which means that they will not be leased with the company. And so there will be parcels that are non-participating, not leased, and they will be skipped. So that's another reason you're not going to get that contiguous ownership, because some parcels are just not going to be leased property owners.
Thank you, Tanya. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Willie, do you have a follow-up?
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I think that leads straight into one of the questions that we had from the audience that's present in the chamber. I could look up who it was. The question was, why here? Why Douglas County? And the follow-up to that was where the power would be used. And I'm wondering if anyone that happens to be on the call from NextEra would comment about, why here? Douglas County land is fairly valuable and also cut up into smaller parcels. So why here, and where would that power be used?
Hey, this is Billy Wilkins from NextEra. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Hey, first off, thanks for the question. I'm the developer for West Gardner Solar. It's a pretty simple answer, I guess, in some ways, but our siting process includes many factors, and one is proximity to transmission. So there's actually West Gardner substation, which is in the area, so we can actually transmit the power directly to the grid, and a relatively close proximity to the actual area where we're trying to acquire land. excuse me. So it's close to transmission, also relatively, accessible land that is flat and can be built. There's other conditions that are a deal, but mostly it's proximity to transmission.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkins. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Ashworth.
Chair Ashworth, Planning Commission. Yeah, just piggybacking on what Commissioner Willie asked, one of the industry representatives here could talk about the viability of a solar facility that is many different parcels that make up the so-called farm. I think of it as kind of like a mitigation bank for wetlands, where it's not just one big continuous parcel, but 200 acres, 500 acres, up to 1,000 acres. Is that a viable solar facility to have it parceled out like that?
So it's actually preferred for us to have contiguous land, so parcels that are connected together. But because this is a choice, we approach landowners and they have a choice of whether or not they want to participate. I think the earlier description is accurate, where we may have a parcel that's 80 acres that's connected to another parcel that's 100 acres. And then we may have a gap in between those. And it just depends on which landowners actually want to participate in the area where we're trying to acquire land. But our preference actually is to have a contiguous site. That's from a cost perspective, it's more preferred, most preferred. Just from resource allocation, when you don't have to spread out your resources across a wider swath of land, it's more beneficial to the economics of the project.
Thank you, sir. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Ashworth, was that a satisfactory answer? Okay. Other commissioners with questions for commenters or comments themselves? Commissioner Ashworth.
Chair National Planning Commission, just to pick up on another topic that was brought up by the public in the chambers I'm wondering if someone, again, from the industry could address the herbicide drift. Now, it's my understanding that if this is agricultural land, there are already many herbicides and chemicals spread on agricultural land. So I don't know what might be different about the chemicals for vegetation control that might be used on a solar facility.
She wants to make comment.
I'll try to talk to that one. Again, this is Billy Wilkins from NextEra. We're no different than any other company operating in the area where we would have to comply with all local laws. I think, the reality is that people have been living safely around solar panels for generations. And, the panels themselves are made of solid materials and don't pose any chemical hazard to the general public or the underlying soil or groundwater. So from the perspective of what's actually in the panels, there's no danger. Now, I understand you're probably referring to treatment of the land, if there's any treatment of the grasses that may be in the area. But for all that, we would be in compliance with whatever the local regulations and laws are.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you for that question and your response, Mr. Wilkins. Commissioner Willie, go ahead.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. Yeah, I'd like to tag along with that. I think the specific concern was, chemical drift from herbicide use for maintaining the vegetation around the panels. And I think that's, I do recognize that, agriculture, commercial agriculture does use a lot of products, but that's not to say that they are safe or not problematic for the neighbors, especially for specialty crops. So I think if what we're going for is land that is hopefully has a continuous vegetation under it, but that is maintained with minimal chemical use, I think we may have to spell something out. And I don't want to disallow chemical use, but I think we could, like 2,4-D and dicamba that are specifically known to drift and cause problems for specialty crops and people's gardens and orchards and things like that nearby. I think something that could be spelled out. I also, if I don't mind showing my hand tonight, I don't expect that we will finish these regulations tonight. I think we have a lot to take in, and I want to keep talking about it. I think we can make a lot of progress, but I think that we will have probably another stab at this.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Shanklin. Commissioner Shanklin, go ahead and offer your thoughts.
I didn't hear me being recognized. This is Greg Shanklin, Planning Commissioner. And just to follow on to Commissioner Willey's comment there about this taking a little more conversation, one of the things I wanted to point out, and I tried to raise my hand as a point of order earlier before we started this conversation, is that we have a novel planning or a novel land use that we're trying to plan for that's competing with agriculture, which neither of which I think we understand completely well. And so we're taking a first stab at planning for the long term with this novel land use, the solar farm, against the use of at least at the moment, it's only discouraged prime agricultural soils. And to me, it's very unfortunate that we've taken this text amendment in the order that we have relative to the one that's coming up Wednesday night, because it would have been nice to have a more fulsome conversation about our scarce ag resources before we entered into this conversation. And just as you know, to tip my hand a little bit here, I think it's puzzling that we're going to look at LISA standards on Wednesday night that would have us ranking high for protection any property outside the urban growth boundary that is more than 50% prime soils. And so in my view, we should just completely eliminate prime soils from consideration for solar farms and be done with it. To layer on to that, I'm very concerned about the text that we have for the reclamation process. Mr. Allman noted before that it's highly likely that new technology is going to replace the newly installed technology, and so that we will never see ag land used as ag land in the future under these panels. And even if that's not the case and there is no new technology, I have a fair amount of experience dealing with environmental remediation across the country. And a few things I've learned include that initial estimates of reclamation costs are usually wrong by an order of magnitude of 10 or more. And secondly, the credit parties that you expected to be there 20 years from day one are not around any longer. They've either been declared insolvent or they simply managed to move on. And earlier commenter referred to layers of LLCs, and that's certainly what I would do if I were setting up this company. So that's my view on things. I don't think we're anywhere close to having good regulations around the reclamation process. There are text changes that I would want to make. I'd like to ask Mr. Larkin if he's on the call, if this were reviewed by Creditors' Rights Council with environmental remediation experience, because there are lots of things we should be doing there to protect the county in the future, including getting involved in the leaseholds. That should be built into these regulations so that we don't get blindsided with another cleanup situation like we have with farmland. So that's my view on things.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Shanklin. I think with respect to Randy Larkin, I don't think he's able to participate because this is a county-related matter. But I might ask Jeff, would you be able to confirm that and maybe clarify sort of the, I think it's a good question about sort of the order of this text amendment versus the one that we will be hearing in a couple of days on the LISA standards.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Chair, you are correct. Randy Larkin is a deputy city attorney, so he's not able to participate on county items. So he is not with us this evening on this particular one. It was a little bit of a toss up on your schedule on which one would go on which night, and so we scheduled it in that way. But I do agree with Commissioner Shanklin. There's an inherent link to them in many respects in the way that they talk about the items. So I think it's good they're going in the same month. We just couldn't accommodate them both on the same night, unfortunately.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Jeff. Other comments? Commissioner Willie?
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. Mary, would you mind, are you able to pull up the photos that I sent from this morning? They didn't make it into I didn't get the packet. I'd already read the packet and didn't see them come in, but I'd like to share those with and talk a little bit about my experience touring the Baldwin City solar farm, if possible. So the Baldwin City put in a solar farm, and it's actually run by and owned by Evergy for the benefit of Baldwin City customers on their grid. They do a little bit of self-generation, even Baldwin City does, even before this plant went in. It's a 1 megawatt system on 5 acres. And Baldwin City, according to what they told us this morning, at peak uses about 8 megawatts for Baldwin City. So at the most, it's producing 1/8 of Baldwin City's power on 5 acres. So when I did a little bit of very quick math, if it is even scalable like this, for a 1,000 acre project, that means that it would produce about 200 megawatts. And I'm happy to have anyone who knows more about it weigh in on that, which would be about 25 times Baldwin City's use. So the 1,000 acres of solar panels is not a small project. And I think it could be kind of looked at in that way in terms of what its contribution could be. Mary, are you looking for? Okay. So I did ask while we were out there, Baldwin City Public Works and Evergy, they have joint responsibility over that plot, if they would be interested in hosting a tour for any other planning commissioners who would like to see it. I have to say I was very impressed. I was surprised at how much I liked it there. It was at the lowest, the panels were about 2 feet off the ground, and then of course taller than that. It is a fixed system, so it does not pivot with the sun. It's just south facing. There was a permanent grass cover with a native wildflower mix in it. And they're about 2 years in, and they expect by year 3 to have a larger percentage of wildflowers there. It was full of pollinators. They mow it twice a year to maintain it. When I asked about the possibility of co-grazing with sheep and the solar panels, the Baldwin City guys were not especially excited about that, but Evergy said, not a problem, it can be done. So that was kind of the general gist of our tour there. I would say in terms of, I asked about noise and contaminants, and we stood by the inverters, which there was 1 per row, and they were in the middle of the row rather than at the ends. So that the distance from there to the property line was quite great. The noise level was tiny. The bug noises for just the being in the grass there were quite a bit louder, including the person that was mowing another property further away was louder than anything that came off of the property we were there. We're looking at the as there isn't a proper substation here because it's too small, but there was a small, somebody would have to help me with what the technology is here. The inverters are 1 for each row, and then these small transformers, I guess. The small one provides power to the grid if the power goes down, and then the other, it receives power from the grid. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. It was a good experience. I answered a lot of questions. In terms of contaminants from the panels themselves, it didn't feel like a big concern for me, even as a soil scientist, as somebody fairly knowledgeable with that. Unless there's breakage of the panel, in which case I think that they would know that fairly quickly because all this is monitored online. That would be an issue and they would have to be replaced, but that was my general experience.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Other comments or questions from commissioners? Commissioner Rexroad.
Thank you, Commissioner Rexroad. When I think about the question of acreage, and I think about this from a business perspective, I wonder about the question about how we set up an environment that's going to attract projects. And I wonder, and I'm not sure who to ask this question of, but I'd love to know the answer to this. If we removed the question of maximum acreage altogether, and it wasn't a part of the regulation, is it true that every project that comes through CUP would have that as one of the considerations for a yes or a no? And I think there's, from a business person's perspective, and I think about how we attract projects of any size, everything that we do that puts restrictions out in front of someone becomes a limiter. And in fact, if we already know, and the data that was is a part of this staff report suggests that average size projects today, commercial projects today, already exceed that cap. If we stick with that 1,000-acre limitation, even though it might be removed by waiver, if we stick with that, would that put us in a position where some projects might not even be considered here? We wouldn't even have a chance to say no. And I wonder if, just again, from a business person's perspective, if we should think about enabling businesses to come in and look at the entire environment, and then have the question of soil type, which is certainly critically important, but have that question as a separate question from the size of a project. That's the question of where, as opposed to how big it might be. So I'd love the answer to the question from staff about if we removed it altogether, would that in any way remove the right that either this commission or county commission later would have to say no to the project based on the where or the how big. The other comment I'd like to make is something that hasn't been brought up yet. We've talked quite a little bit about the advantage of solar, the critical need for alternative sources of energy from a climate perspective. And I completely agree with those thoughts, and everything that we do to that end is helpful. Everything we can do to create an environment where those kinds of projects might come to Douglas County is part of how we contribute to that. But as part of my day job, I work with Fortune 500 companies all over the country. And these companies are actively working to reduce their carbon footprint. They're looking for ways that they can build their business and contribute to either a carbon neutral kind of position, which makes counties like Douglas County, if it had a renewable energy source, a prime location for them to consider. That gives Douglas County, our chamber, everyone around here, just one more economic development tool. That's something that hasn't come up before, but I know that it's something that's out there in the mind of corporate America. So just the combination of those things has me leaning towards this idea that if we remove the language on cap altogether and let projects come, because we always have that right to say no about where it is or how big it might be. I'll stop there.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Rexroad. Mary, I guess, would you like to address some of those comments from Commissioner Rexroad? Would you be
Mary
able to?
Miller, planner. Yes, I understand he was asking if we did not have the 1,000 acre cap, would the commission have the ability to deny a project? And you do. On a conditional use, you have the ability to deny a project in total, or when a project comes through, you can deny it on certain parcels. If for some reason you feel a parcel shouldn't have solar panels on it, maybe it's some features about it you find are unacceptable. It's a lot like when a quarry comes through. I just have more familiarity with those. We had one that came through, and it's going to be 900 acres, which is pretty huge for a quarry, but based on the location, the commission found it was acceptable. Had you not, you could have said, we would approve 500 acres. So you do have the ability. It's a conditional use. They have no guarantees when they submit. And so, it's the commission can decide, and they can place additional conditions even that aren't in the standards.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Ashworth?
Sharon Ashworth, Planning Commissioner. Also, I have a couple comments about the 1,000-acre, but just what Mary just said makes me think even strongly that I think this 1,000-acre cap is somewhat arbitrary. It doesn't mean 1,000 acres of prime farmland. There can be gaps in a 1,000-acre project to accommodate environmentally sensitive lands. As Mary Miller just said, we can approve certain parcels, not other parcels. So I'm finding that flexibility a nice environment. And I just find that 1,000-acre cap somewhat arbitrary. I don't think it allows for creativity. I don't think it allows for businesses to find this area attractive for solar farms. I think a solar farm in Douglas County is a statement, and will add to at least our attempts for a climate mitigation plan, which is something that we're taking up in the coming months or a year, is a climate mitigation plan. And then the other comment I had is terms of reclamation. I am also familiar with a number of reclamation projects and share the concerns of a couple of the other commissioners about reclamation projects. However, these sorts of projects, many of them are actually could in fact be an improvement in terms of the soil. If you're going to put native vegetation on these areas, that's actually a long way towards reclaiming the fertility of the soils in this area. If you're going to have maintained native perennial ground cover there, that's a long way into when you pull up those solar panels at a decommissioning, you've already managed to reclaim a good portion of the viability of that soil and the protection of that soil from erosion.
Thank you, Commissioner Ashworth. Other comments? Commissioner Carpenter.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. I'm struggling to know where to start. There's so much here at so many different levels. We've heard people speaking about these issues from multiple perspectives and levels. Economics. We want to make a statement that we are actually environmentally progressive in Douglas County. And if we deny expansion of this or allowing this to happen, then we're not following what we've already set in Plan 2040, the competing values of the individual landowners, the farmers. And the fact that solar itself and the production of solar panels and all the infrastructure for it is not carbon neutral. It's extractive technology spread around the world. There's transportation costs to get here. There's petrochemicals used in the production. I mean, the end product is to capture sunlight. I don't like the term solar farm. That came around a long time ago to try to make these projects more palatable, to try to get interest in them. This is a utility. This is a solar-powered utility, not a farm. And I don't want to literally sell the farm for solar utilities. I think we have a balance here
I think solar is incredibly important and a laudable goal, and we need it. I share some of the concerns about the location. I know for a fact that NextEra has been purchasing options throughout the eastern part of the county and into Johnson County. We don't know how many acres that is, how many landowners that is. We don't know what's out there waiting for us. So we're kind of operating in a vacuum. Plus, we've heard from staff, county staff, that NextEra is just one of possibly 4 or 5 companies looking to place solar utilities in our county. And they're all interested in this. We don't know what the total acreage that's going to be requested is. I'm very intrigued by what Senator Mark Francisco raised and some other speakers raised about about the LISA that's on the land evaluation system that we're going to talk about Wednesday. I think we got the cart before the horse here. I'm intrigued by the idea of identifying what type of soils these should not be on first, what type of soils should be available for this. We kind of need to have an inventory of just what we're looking at, because every acre we put under solar, we take out of ag production for, as one speaker said, 30, 60, possibly even longer as technologies improve, as Michael Ullman pointed out. We'll probably replace these and come up with more efficient ones, and they're not going to go away as long as they're making a profit and contributing to the grid. We're not the best area in the state for collecting sunlight. You look at the solar maps, it gets better and better as you go west and south, which is also land that doesn't have water for agriculture. So, part of this is about easy distribution to a market. We have no guarantees that any of these are going to come and help us. There have been questions posed to NextEra on their Facebook page, which has been up since December. How will this reduce my utility bills? The answer's been, we haven't even identified a buyer for our product, our electricity yet. It's going to feed into the grid. Who knows where it's going to go? And, what it's going to do to, rates. We can already purchase, through our utility companies. We can say we want our utilities, our electricity to mostly come from renewable sources, and you pay extra for the feeling that yours is coming from a renewable source. But it's the same electricity in the wires. It doesn't know where it came from or where it's going. So, there's a lot of issues here. And, looking at the map, we have 456 square miles of land in our county. And a lot of that's got buildings on it already. I know the county's got maps of how much is already built, how much is parceled out, how much is available for agriculture. I think we need some larger discussions. How much agricultural do we need to protect? Because with climate change, we've heard this, we're going to be able to grow less as growing conditions change. Transportation systems are going to be more expensive to transport food. Are we going to have to pull more into local agriculture to feed ourselves down the road over the next 30 years? I don't know. I don't see this as agricultural land banking when you're talking 30, 50 years. I don't know what it's going to do to the land. I don't know what the reclamation is going to be. We've heard those issues too. I want to see solar utilities, but I don't want to lose our ability to grow the foods that we might need down the road, since most of our county is very good for growing crops and livestock, and other counties don't have that. They aren't blessed with what we have here. So I don't want to, we have to find that balance. And I think we're just at the beginning of that conversation. And whether we're attracting industry to Douglas County or not, we have to weigh it against that, the long-term value and sustainability of our county and our cities in our county. You know, we could have, maybe we'll have more solar utilities than any other county, but that doesn't help if we have to import more food at a higher price. So I don't know how we find that balance. I think we're on our way, but I think we need more information so we can figure out these rules. And I'd like to continue the conversation. I'll just point out also that at last Wednesday's county commission meeting, Commissioner Kelly was very explicit in his support for protecting agricultural land in this county. They had the boat storage that we had that extended a conditional use permit that was only going to take up less than an acre of ag land to expand it. He agreed with everything that we said, but he specifically voted no to send the message that protection of agricultural land is a very high priority for this county. So, you know, they rarely send us clear messages like that. So we have to find that proper balance as we move forward. So that's where I am on this. And I wish we knew more just about what projects were being anticipated, how much land was already under contract, where this was, so we can fit that into our modeling and how we figure out where this is appropriate and where it's not appropriate, because I don't think it's appropriate everywhere.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thanks, Commissioner Carpenter. Commissioner Shanklin.
My apologies. I don't know if you can hear me or not. I've had to change methods of communication here. I got knocked off my phone call. Greg Shanklin, Planning Commissioner. And as a result of getting knocked off, I saw that Commissioner Ashworth was making some comments, and I caught the tail end of Commissioner Carpenter's comments, but I wanted to revert to something that Commissioner Rexroad had said earlier, because in my initial comments, I may have overemphasized my concern about the loss of ag land. I'm too, as Commissioner Rexroad is, very much in favor of finding good businesses for Douglas County. And one of the things I think we don't understand about this novel land use is what kind of business is it for Douglas County? Who benefits from it? Is it merely a tax rateable? I can't even speak to that because I don't know how utilities are taxed. But that would be good information for us for our consideration here. I guess, and beyond that, are there employment benefits? Are there secondary and tertiary market benefits that we get from having a solar farm in our county? Those are things that it would just be helpful to understand before we wholesale commit to regulations that would permit something, well, that, as I said, we don't fully understand. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Shanklin. Commissioner Ashworth.
Sharon Ashworth, Planning Commission. Just a procedural question, process question for staff. I'm hearing a lot of comment about hesitating, certainly on these regulations, a lot of thoughtful discussion that needs to happen. But I'm curious about the applications that might be coming forward. You had mentioned, Mary, that this was an attempt to get ahead of these applications that were coming in. So if our discussion of the regulations were to continue on, what happens does that mean any applications that come in would be discussed without these regulations? Would there be a process for hammering out these regulations with further discussion before a project were to come in? Can you tell us a little bit about what the implications are?
Mary Miller, planner. I could try it, but I think I'll defer to Jeff when I'm done. Unless it's a moratorium, people can submit applications. So an application could come in tomorrow for a solar farm. it would fall under the category utilities, and we have no standards. And I don't know, Jeff, if there's what the process would be after that, if we would just try to find a way to put it on hold, or if we would have to process and while we're developing the standards.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Typically, if that was to occur, you'd have to process under the standards which were adopted at the time the application was submitted. So it's whatever the application and the rules are at the moment is when you proceed. So to give an example, it's probably a little bit more easier to follow. If somebody submits a development under one set of guidelines requiring a certain amount of parking, it's the guidelines that are applicable at the time of submission that apply. So if the text amendment was for parking was to come in and change the standard, but that application is still in process, that process continues under the guidelines that were applicable when it was submitted. So to kind of give you that long range look of those things.
Thank you.
Looks like clear, Chair. Thanks, Commissioner Ashworth. Thank you, Jeff. Other commissioners, comments? Commissioner Rexroad.
Nice. Commissioner Rexroad, thank you. I'm curious, Mr. Chair, what our path forward would be if we're saying that we need deeper conversation, we need to understand this further. How do we quantify that? How do we get to a list of items that we say, okay, let's hammer these out definitively so that we can move to an initial body of recommendations that would go on to the commissioners to approve. Would it be possible to identify that so that we can, get our heads around that between now and the next conversation, with the idea that in that next conversation we come to a conclusion?
Luke Sinclair, Chair. I think it's a great question, and I honestly don't know the right answer. I think we've covered a lot of different topics tonight and concerns, and I don't know. I guess maybe I would bounce that question back to Jeff. Is if one possibility was to defer, is there enough substance from our discussion tonight for staff to be able to again revisit this, and maybe this time not in the sense of gathering additional comments from the public, but actually trying to figure out, how to address some of the things that commissioners have raised?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. To the chair's question, I believe we do have quite a list of items both the public has shared with us, and we've also heard from the commissioners this evening to kind of go back and start looking into it, researching, and getting more information for you. So we do have quite a bit of lists, and also defer to Mary to see if she would agree with that, or if my list is just on my own here. But I feel like we got a pretty good direction of items to research and bring back for the commission's further consideration. And Mary, feel free to let me know if I'm stepping off base on that comment.
Mary Miller, planner. No, I agree. I think the comments are very clear, that everybody, what they've said. I think there's a set of comments basically that we could look at, and it may be helpful after Wednesday's discussion on the LISA that we might find more information from that people are interested in. So I think we would be able to use just a discussion.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. I mean, my main concern, I guess, in this is I don't want this to be sort of a perpetual effort to kick the can down the road. As each time we come back, see what updates have been made or suggested revisions. We talk about a lot of different topics, feel unsatisfied, and kick the can down the road again. I mean, I think we do need to get something going and recommended to the county commission. I share, however, concerns that a few commissioners have raised about not having the benefit of hearing about about LISA. I think that can be really helpful. One of my primary concerns about this is truly what we do with prime soils and ag land, and how that's weighed against owners' rights. I think that Commissioner Carpenter referenced, and I guess economic development issues too. And I think, Lisa, that discussion at least would be very helpful. Commissioner Willie, I saw you raise your hand.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I have just a few concrete things that I would want to see to move forward with, and I am increasingly comfortable with the standards as the staff has been bringing to us. The main one is, regardless of soil type, if we are putting the regulations in that we need for this to be, as Commissioner Ashworth mentioned, a benefit, long-term benefit to the soils, which is, permanent standing vegetation that is managed without a lot of chemical use. If this acts as, I know Commissioner Carpenter doesn't like the term land banking, but I do. I think that's the goal that we're going for, is to have solar production, yes, and it may not be done in 30, 40, 50 years, but 100 years from now, and I think it's okay to think in that time scale, that this land has more soil organic matter, more soil carbon than it did when we started, and than it possibly ever would have had under conventional agriculture. And then that land then is available and mostly unadulterated for use for long-term food production. That matters to me more than soil type, more than class 1 and 2 soils. I think it's a standard that we can and should apply to any solar farms, solar production area that we would talk about. And I think it's entirely doable. So in terms of very specifics, the soil tests that were asked for, I think an initial soil test for heavy metals to help inform the reclamation process, to know if there was any contamination that happened, and maybe that has to be done every 10 or 20 years just to be sure there isn't an issue. But what I'd really like to see is soil organic matter or soil carbon testing that is done periodically, so that we know that, for one thing, we're not going backwards, and that I think we can be making an improvement. We could be storing carbon with the right kind of management. And I think that's a standard that is helpful for all of us and can be realistically achieved along with solar panels. The second issue that I have, and I'm not sure how to resolve this, and I think it will take some more input from energy companies, actually, is about the fencing. If we're talking large tracts of land like this, fencing, so deer apparently are problematic. What can we do to make deer not problematic, so that we don't have to have these large tracts of land, every acre of which has to have a 6 or 7 foot tall chain link fence that wildlife would not get through? How we'd be taking this out of, we might offer, pollinator plots, but we wouldn't be offering anything to wildlife or wildlife migration. I'd like to have some more information about that. So when we were at the solar farm, saw some of the wiring is on the bottom of the panels. If that could be put in conduit, would you be less worried about deer? Like what would it take to rectify that problem? Those are the two. Everything else is about scale, and we have to work on that. So we'll just have to find out what's our comfort level as a commission and as a county with how much solar, but I do think we can find a way to move forward with this.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Willie, if I could ask you a question, just sort of in response to what you said. I think maybe it has to do with that, but the language in the current regulations that discusses the provision involving reclamation, it talks about returning the land to a useful, non-hazardous condition. In terms of what the land can be used for in the future, I mean, is that in your mind satisfactory language? Is that specific enough for what we can use it for? Is that just too amorphous? It seems to me that it is, but I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that.
I think it's a pretty low bar. I think we could probably work on the language there. For one thing, that like the small farm we visited, and I know that is a very small piece compared to what we're talking about acreage wise. So it was 5 acres there, but the structure for the solar panels was pushed into the ground. It wasn't excavated and then filled with concrete pylons. That probably wouldn't be available everywhere, but so there's not as much to tear out. There really were just a few cables running from one solar row to the next, and that I'm open to whether or not that stays in the ground or comes out of the ground if it's under 36 inches. I know we leave all the rest of our utilities under the ground when we walk away from a property that are that deep. So I think that language could be worked on.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thanks for that, Commissioner Willie. Commissioner Thomas.
It seems to me that we have in Douglas County made the commitment to solar panels. We're saying we want them. I would need to know specifically, and some of the other commissioners have touched on it, and some of the people that spoke touched on it. What is the benefit to Douglas County? What specifically would be the benefits to Douglas County? Is it just a tax basis? Are there better areas? I shouldn't even say are. There are better areas that sunlight-wise are better than Douglas County. But what is the purpose for our saying we want solar panels in Douglas County? Now, anybody can apply, any company can apply for, and I don't like the term solar farm either. Any energy company can apply for this solar array, and we need regulations to tell the solar companies what they can do. But do we really want solar companies and solar panels in Douglas County other than, gosh, it's a great idea and the 2040 plan has said we want it. But what will be the benefits to Douglas County specifically? I would like to know that.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Are there any other commissioners that want to sort of zero in on their comments for, I guess, make any comments about this or provide more specifics? Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes, this is Commissioner Rexroad. Thank you. I made a couple of comments about potential benefits. I'm not an expert in the area. I can't in any way quantify that, but I wonder if some of the industry folks that are on the phone with us today have some experience about the positive benefits, economic benefits, other long-term benefits that you have seen from projects that you've put in.
Yeah, this is Alan Anderson with Polsinelli. Yeah, we've worked on most of the wind projects in the state, and we certainly are working on most of the solar projects as well. And there's a myriad of things. So if we start with, there is a tax-based benefit. You'd have both the property tax and you'd have an increase in the personal property and real property tax. So there would be the benefits there, and those would be not small. You would have obviously direct payments to the participants in the project, and that would then have a multiplier effect through the region. And again, we have to remember a project only goes in with willing participants who want to use their land as they deem the most economically beneficial and those kind of things. So those people, that revenue would also have economic impact through the area. There would be significant, they call it a 1 to 2 year period of time where you'd have construction and those kind of things. And so you'd have the benefits during that period of time. And then you'd have some amount of permanent jobs from that. Additionally, of course, you have all the, as you referenced and others have alluded to, you will have the benefit of the energy that will go into the grid. But and sometimes this is getting lost. All energy goes into the grid unless it's consumed on site. So that's not a negative. That's how energy works. It goes into the grid, into the Southwest Power Pool. If it were contracted with the local utility, then it would have the benefits that we see on the wind side too. We in the state of Kansas have nearly 50% of our energy coming from wind energy. that has been exceptionally benefit to the rates. So we do benefit from the wind power. We'd similarly benefit from the solar in this case, because solar has unique properties because it comes on during some of the most expensive times for the utilities. So they'd be able to have that contracted. So there'd be ratepayer benefit that we would see, because that would go in, even though it goes into the grid, to be contracted likely with a utility. And you'd have, then as stated before, it's not to feel good about having a solar project. Those are all direct benefits. Additionally, then we'd be doing the part that is necessary to mitigate against climate change that can have significant economic detriments. So it's a mitigation against those detriments too. As we think about farmland, it has a chance to mitigate against the massive impacts of those farm bankruptcies, because now insurance is more expensive. It's more expensive to do all those different things related to the land. So massive mitigating impacts that this contributes to as well. And again, I think there's an opportunity to kind of speak about the economic benefits, but it's layered and myriad and just massive. It's not just a feel good. It's not because Douglas County said they want to be part of the climate change as a feel good story. It's because it has direct impacts on people, farmers, and others that if we don't do something with that, but we also have massive amount of direct benefits right away.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Other comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Ashworth.
Sharon Ashworth, Planning Commission. I just want to say another comment is I would like to have utility scale solar as part of a portfolio of options for dealing with climate change. Climate action plan, mitigation plan that comes from Douglas County, I think needs to have that as part of its portfolio. So yes, it is a balance with agricultural land, and it is a balance with building and growth. It's a balance with what we use our land for, but it has to be part of the portfolio for dealing with climate change. I think it's critically important for us to have that in our pocket to be able to do that. We've got a crisis on our hands, and this has to be part of the solution.
Thanks, Commissioner Ashworth. Luke Sinclair, Chair. I guess if I were to take the temperature, it sounds like a good number of the commission wish to defer this to allow for some more tweaking. But is there anyone that wants to push the other way, or does someone want to make a motion and see sort of where we are? Commissioner Ashworth.
Just Sharon Ashworth, Planning Commission. I just restate my concern that if we push this down the road, I'm a little uncomfortable with pushing it down the road too far. If we've got projects that are coming up soon, I really don't want to go forward with them and try to discuss a CUP without any standards.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. I understand those concerns, and I agree with you. I think I'm sensitive to the situation staff is in, just because they're gonna, if applications are coming in, they're gonna have to be doing this work that we're doing right now on the application, and that's what we're trying to avoid. By the same token, I don't know that we'll be able to get a vote to recommend approval to this. It'll go up, with a recommendation of denial, and that'll sort of, seems to me it would have the same impact, but I don't know. Commissioner Shanklin.
Greg Shanklin, Planning Commissioner. I've been wondering, because I think it's somewhat premature in that we don't have complete knowledge about how these projects play out going forward. Is it possible to draft a set of regulations with a sunset that would enable a project or two to get started but then that would give us the opportunity to revisit at some point fairly soon, I think, just as an alternative.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Shanklin, is that something that was directed to the commission, or are you asking staff as an alternative?
I guess, I'm sorry. I guess that anybody, whether staff or commissioners that are familiar with how we've addressed a problem like this before, where we have a novel land use and want to enable some exploratory development in that area, but don't know what the long-range impacts to the county might be. Is there some way that we can, do a little enabling, but not a lot, and so that we can follow up with more information and change the regulations in a way that, experience tells us. So I guess that's for Jeff Crick.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Shanklin, I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. I can tell you in previous examples of land uses like this, the county chose to declare a moratorium to allow staff the time to develop standards and guidelines to come into place first, because we didn't have the knowledge and the details for what we wanted to see in that longer term. And the recent example I can cite would be wind farm facilities. We did a very similar example of that one, but I don't know the answer to your question about having a interim set of interim set of use regulations to be in place. I'd have to research that and get back to the commission on that item.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Rexroad.
Thank you, Commissioner Rexroad. I share with Commissioner Ashworth an interest in moving forward, providing our staff and our county with a foothold to begin looking at projects. As I listened to commentary tonight, there's a number of concerns that are voiced, a number of questions that are outstanding. One of the most consistent being around the maximum acreage cap. Other questions as well, of course, but many of the other questions, particularly around the use of soil types 1 and 2, I believe that we have the opportunity as a commission and then the downstream authorities that would approve it to say yes or no to any of those questions. We have the ability to make land use decisions as those specific projects come before us. I'd be in favor tonight of moving forward with the work that has been done. I personally would love to see us either raise the maximum cap to 2,000 acres or remove it entirely, knowing that this body and the other commissioners have the ability to say yes or no to those things. But that would give us an opportunity to move forward, work through a project or two, and if there are changes that we need to rationalize based on some of that experience, we can always revisit that. I'm not sure if I'm the Lone Ranger in that, or if there are other commissioners who would be interested in moving forward.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Rexford. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Willie.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. In my experience, rushing is not helpful, because when we do need to come back and revise something, it doesn't come back to us. And I think that's been one of the hardest lessons of my time on the Planning Commission, is the things that we got not quite right, or things that we would like to see changed, we never get a second chance. And it's not that we couldn't, it's just that everybody's busy and you get it on the work schedule and it's 4 years down the road. So my thought is to take one more meeting. I think we're closer than we think. I think some language work gets me within reason. And my biggest concern is not necessarily the acreage cap. I think there's some details other than that to be worked out. So my question would be for Jeff, and that is, when could we see this again? How quickly? And by the same token, how quickly would it take somebody else to get a project on the books before that?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Depending on the list of items that we need to research and get back to, it could take us a month or 2 months potentially to bring that full research back to you and get that to you. It's our expectation that we would be bringing this back to you as soon as we can for your consideration and review on that item. So it just depends on the list and the amount of research that we have to put in to get to the answers the question has given us to me. The questions the commission has given us this evening.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Willie, did you have a follow-up or any other comments to offer on that?
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I am comfortable to take another month. I'd rather take that than 2 months, but because I do see the urgency of getting some regulations and standards in place, but also just kind of building on the momentum of our discussion. And I don't want to see it drag out. I'd like to see us move forward, but I think that it is well worth the extra month's time.
Commissioner Willie. Other commissioners have an opinion on that particular idea? Commissioner Thomas.
Commissioner Charlie Thomas. So what would we have to do to have a moratorium until we have these regulations? What would it take to say we are going to have a moratorium rather than have a company come in, apply, and we're stuck with the regulations that we have now? What would that take?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. That would require the Board of County Commissioners to move and adopt for a moratorium on an item.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Thomas, does that answer your question or do you have a follow-up?
Commissioner Charlie Thomas, that does answer my question. I would like to see the county commissioners then at their meeting propose the moratorium, if that's what we would suggest to them. And have that done before we run into issues with companies that apply to build solar panels.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Jeff, I guess a question for that. The moratoriums that the county has done before, have those been sort of as applications have reached them? I mean, is this something that would even be on the county commission's radar?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Oh, also maybe Tanya will have a little bit more insight and detail to that one. But from what I remember about the wind farm applications and that process, I think there was an application in process from what I remember. I may have my timeline slightly muddled from many years back, and maybe Tanya has that detail more readily available.
Tanya Voigt, Zoning Director. I believe that the Board of County Commissioners would want to see that as a majority request from the Planning Commission. I think they would want to know that there's a lot of the Planning Commission members thinking along those same lines and providing that guidance to the Board of County Commissioners. And then we as staff would be able to take that directly to the Board of County Commissioners and make that request to them. So that would be, drafting a resolution, having the conversation with the Board of County Commissioners and just seeing what direction they go.
Mr. Chairman, could we speak to this just very quickly?
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Mr. Peterson, you can take a couple
Thank you.
minutes. Please.
I appreciate that.
Keep it short.
Commissioners, we've entered into this dialogue and working with your staff, and it's been productive. Each time we've talked to your staff, we've made progress finding common ground, and we would respectfully ask that we not move down the road of a moratorium. It sends a chilling effect to the financial communities, to other companies we're trying to work with to bring a great project to eastern Kansas and Douglas County. If we have to take another month or 2 months to close the gap, I will say, and one other quick point, please do not interpret it as presumptuous that we are out tying some ground up. You have to know that you have some partners before you start spending, the effort to work with staff and build a good set of regulations. There's key issues here that are set forth in the regulations we adopt that we understand we would have to prove in a special conditional use permit process. Impact on wildlife, cultural, historical, archaeological features, crucial wildlife habitats, water quality and soil erosion. We've heard tonight about further evaluation of soil conditions. Give us 2 months as an applicant, potential applicant, to work forward with your staff and bring you back a draft that'll close the gap and find the common ground. And we will commit on our behalf. We're not going to try to race to the courthouse and file an application under the utility regulations that are in the county. That's not good faith. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to find a path that is acceptable to all. So if it takes more time, we're here to try to be your partners and create a good document. We'd ask we do it in the form of a continuance, not a moratorium. That sends all sorts of implications that I'm not sure it would be intended by the county.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Willie?
I agree with Mr. Peterson. I think it is unnecessarily chilling to future development. I think it might actually be slower than us just finishing our regulations. And I think we're so much further along with this than the county was when we first came up with the thought of a wind farm. So I really think we can make this happen in the next couple of months. And I don't think, even though we also don't have control over what the county commission would like to do with it, but I think that this process is working.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Commissioner Thomas, I think it was a good thought, but I would tend to agree with those comments too. I think we can and should get this done in 60 or 30 or 60 days or whatever it is next time we see it, and just get it moving. Do any other commissioners have comments, or is there anyone willing to make a motion? I feel like we're getting to a point where we might be able to do that. Commissioner Carpenter.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commission. I just have a question for Jeff or Becky. As far as notice requirements for putting this on a future agenda, are we able to do it in 30 days or are we stuck with 60 days?
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services Director. I was just checking that item out there. We can get this on the agenda to have come back at your September meeting. The legal publication is available to us on that item there. So we would be able to turn around, we would be able to get it on there on your next meeting available, as long as we can get the questions and the research turned around quickly.
And just to follow up, is this something that we can actually possibly schedule over both nights so that we could have one night to really discuss it and the second night to actually vote on the text amendment?
Jeff Craig,
any fine-tuning tweaks at that time instead of trying to go out another meeting after that?
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services. You can have an item that runs across multiple nights. We can try to make sure we get that information adjusted between the two nights. It can be a little difficult, but we can definitely have an item run across Monday and a Wednesday evening.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commission. I think we are narrowing in on what we would be able to agree to on forwarding to the county commission. I just don't want to try to do it all in one night and come up, oh, wait, what about this? And then have to change some of the language and put it off again. So if we could do that at our next, Monday, Wednesday meeting, I think that would be helpful to everybody just to keep this moving, because we don't want it to turn into parking, which we've never come back to for as long as I've been on the commission. Oops.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Do any other commissioners have any comments to make to staff or to each other, or do we have any motions? Commissioner Ashworth.
Sharon Ashworth Planning Commission, just to say that in the interest of having the commission really behind a set of regulations, I can certainly get behind a month delay to make sure everybody's comfortable and have a set that everybody is comfortable with. So I can go for a delay.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Rexroad.
Thank you, Commissioner Rexroad. I'd echo what Commissioner Ashworth just said, and I'd make a motion that we defer to the September meeting this item, asking staff to go back with the comments and questions they've heard tonight and return with an updated draft of this text amendment for our consideration and approval.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Rexroad. We have a motion to defer till September. Is there a second? Commissioner Willie, looks like she's seconding it by a hand motion. Are there any other comments or questions before we have a vote? I'm not seeing any. So Jeff, would you be able to read the roll?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0.
Thank you for your time tonight.
Very well. Thank you, Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thank you, everybody who commented and those who have spent time on this. We'll discuss it later. So that brings us to the end of our regular agenda. And the next is a study session. We have an MPO presentation, I think, from some long-suffering folks, Jessica Mortinger and maybe Ashley Briers. I don't know if she's still on. I guess, do any commissioners need to have a quick break before we launch into this? No, we're good to go. Okay, then I guess then Jessica, should I turn it over to you?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager with the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization. And I have been on the list for a while, I think, to talk at a mid-month, and you haven't had those. So we put together a brief presentation for you. I'll try not to go into too much detail, but I also want you to be able to ask me any questions that you might have about any of our process. I know there's some new commissioners since the last time we've done this before, and I have a little bit of new content that might be new to some of you. Maybe. Okay. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the MPO and tell you about the work that we do, explain our 2021 work plan and the remaining items we have left on the calendar slated for work this year, and then share with you a little bit of the data and process that we both do and are doing more of in regards to environmental justice, so low to moderate income and minority populations and other transportation disadvantaged populations in our community. The MPO is a federally funded agency. We do regional transportation planning, and the as far as the feds are concerned, they really see it as a 3 C's process. So it's comprehensive, it's cooperative, and it's continuous. Just as soon as we get one decision made or one planning process done, we continue to move on. The region changes over time, and transportation needs and the demands on the existing system change. And so it's an ongoing process, and that involves solicitation and conversations with public, residents, travelers, and users of our transportation systems, all of our stakeholder partners at our local jurisdictions and our state and federal partners, as well as the makeup of our own committees and structures that lead us through this transportation process. We have a planning area that encompasses all of Douglas County, and so we like you, in that sense, do work in Lawrence and Douglas County. We also do work in Lecompton, Eudora, and Baldwin City. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and the benefit to those communities. The MPO is its own separate legal entity. So we are not the city, we are not the county. We are made up of primarily elected officials on our MPO policy board. We have 2 representatives from Planning Commission. As you may know, you recently appointed them. We have 2 city commissioners from the city of Lawrence, a Douglas County commissioner, a liaison, and a position representative from the Kansas Department of Transportation, and a rotating seat from Baldwin City, Lecompton, or Eudora, and they rotate on a 3-year basis. All of the work before it goes to our MPO policy board goes to our technical advisory committee or one of our other advisory boards like the Regional Transit Advisory Committee before it ever comes to the MPO policy board. Those groups are made up of staff, our staff partners at all of the agencies that we work with. So transit, city municipal services and operations, county administrative, county public works, and the other city representation. We also then have some other local advisory boards and committees that we work with. So we work with local groups in the city advisory structure. Sometimes we also have like the MPO Bicycle Advisory Committee. And so we staff, as you mentioned earlier, Ashley Briers, who was unable to make it this long this evening, and I'll take over the presentation, but she and I are the 2 full-time staff members for the MPO, and we staff all of these committees and the work that we're going to discuss tonight in partnership with our partners. We have a lot of required documents that we're required to produce to maintain our consistent flow of federal funding into the region and to maintain federal compliance. The work program, we're going to talk a little bit in a minute. The one you're maybe most familiar with is our Metropolitan Transportation Plan called Transportation 2040. It is officially the transportation chapter of Plan 2040, and that's good. And we keep that consistent so there's not 2 separate adopted plans in the region. Out of the long-range plan, we have a transportation improvement program and then a bunch of other plans that are federally required around public participation, Title VI, and limited English proficiency. And we'll talk a little bit about more of those in detail. So every year we write a work plan that gets adopted by the policy board and also accepted by KDOT and the feds to detail the work we're going to do with our grant funding. The MPO work gets an annual budget that's an 80% grant and requires a 20% match to fund the work that we do. For the rest of this year, some of the things you might hear in the community we are working on, we have a financial interest in the transit route redesign that is happening right now with our partners Lawrence Transit and KU on Wheels. We are embarking on a journey to update the 2016 Regional Pedestrian Plan with a Lawrence Pedestrian Plan and then a Eudora Baldwin City Lecompton Pedestrian Plan. We are embarking with the Technical Advisory Committee on some transportation and land use best practices research. We have slated an update both to the public participation plan prior to the Transportation 2040 work that will begin next year update. And an update we are underway with right now to the MPO Federal Highways Roadway Functional Classification Map. And that's just a federally required map process. It's separate than major thoroughfares, which you tie to your land development code for street classifications. But we'll be going through that process, and that's pretty typical for us to do before we go into a long-range transportation plan update. We are also in the works in partnership with KDOT to bring a new staff member on board, and we anticipate that is included in the proposed city 2022 budget, but it would be a mobility planner to help with the coordination of transportation services in our community. So thinking about all of the transit providers from Burt Nash, Cottonwood, Independence, Inc., Senior Resource Center, and then our two larger fixed route providers, working to get people greater access to information and even inter-county rides and other things in terms of coordination. So we're excited about the possibilities that a new mobility planner will bring. The one that I mentioned also earlier that you're probably most familiar with, Transportation 2040. Every 5 years, we are required to adopt a new transportation plan, and it has to have a 20-year forecast range. It's also unique in the sense that it's one of the planning documents we put together that must be fiscally constrained. So we must make fiscal projections about the reasonable accommodation of resources we would anticipate to have over that 20-year period to be able to slot projects in bands that fit within that projected revenue. And so oftentimes, we're looking we have a little more accuracy in the near term, and in the out years, we are making some of our best guesses because we will update the plan before we get to those years. This involves some travel demand modeling, and it ties pretty heavily into the land use plan because there's a lot of assumptions that are made in the projections we make about level of service for transportation on our roadway networks related to density and land use, and the projections that get fed into the model to help tell the story about what transportation network and elements need to be planned for in the long range plan. Out of that plan, then also we manage on a quarterly amendment process. We update this every 2 years. This is a transportation improvement program. You can think of it a little bit like a transportation CIP, or capital improvement program. It's a 4-year listing of projects, and it basically takes all of the elements. Projects must be in the transportation plan, so T2040, to pull them out of that plan to actually program them for funding. So this plan also has a financial component and must be fiscally constrained. You can't put projects in here for implementation that don't have allocated funding. And without a project being in this project, you're unable to get federal funding for it. So from Federal Highway Administration or Federal Transit Administration. This is a very technical document. Oftentimes, since we're an MPO that does not receive our own federal funding, we are relying on the fiscal processes at all the local and state governments to program funding. And then as they do that, if it has a federal component or it's regionally significant, those projects get programmed into this document that tells the story about how the plan is being implemented. So we can't do this process without consulting the public and having an open process to do that. We have, for all of our federally required documents and for our planning processes, we have a public participation plan that outlines the process and methods we intend to use to get from the beginning inception and community vision and plans all the way to plan adoption. We have a Title VI program manual, which tells us and helps us comply with the federal regulations around ensuring that regardless of race, color, or national origin, no one is excluded or denied benefit or is otherwise discriminated against in the process or in the impact of projects from MPO activities. And then we also have a limited English proficiency plan. And while our region does not meet the threshold requirements, which requires automatic translation in any one language for language proficiency, we do want to do our best to eliminate barriers people may face in accessing the planning process in regards to their English proficiency. And this has resulted in us in working with partners in translating surveys, both for the most recent transit route redesign and some safe routes to school planning into Spanish for the engagement work that we have done with populations for both of those plans. Once we get all of those federally required plans done in our process, we really have some flexibility in determining with our technical advisory committee which plans and projects are most relevant to the region in attempting to do some additional mode specific planning. And so I'm just going to present some of those plans to you to just at a really high level. I think if there's any interest in any of these, we can come back at another time and talk in more detail about the process or the result and recommendations that any of these plans have. We have both a City of Lawrence and a countywide bikeway plan that really focuses on bikeways that are of high comfort and value based on deciding design types based on roadway speed and volume, and providing tools for local governments to make those decisions per the planning documents. This is the 20 on the right here. You see the regional pedestrian plan. This was completed in 2016. This is the one we're working on updating this fall. We are beginning that process. We have just recently completed over the last few years and adopted in 2020 safe routes to school plans for Lawrence, Baldwin City, and Eudora. And all of the communities are working on implementing these plans with built environment improvements and other strategies both in and out of the school to make the environment to be able to walk and bike more friendly for children accessing their school sites. We have been involved over time in a lot of the transit planning that has happened with our transit partners. So right now you see at the bottom the mention of our transit route redesign project that we're in partnership with, that they're doing, that Lawrence Transit's doing in tandem with their multimodal transfer facility project. We've participated previously in the comprehensive operations analysis for transit, in a coordinated public transit human services transportation plan, which is about more than just fixed route transit or the big buses you might see on the road, but also a lot of the paratransit and human services transportation that is offered in our region. And then we've also worked on other projects like fixed route transit and pedestrian accessibility. And so that we work in partnership with our transit provider in our region. This is my last page of other plans and studies, and I'll guarantee you there's thousands of pages of reading in some of this, but we just recently completed an update to the Intelligent Transportation System Strategic Deployment and Maintenance Plan, which is very technical, but at a very high level includes the technology improvements that make transportation work. So thinking about signal coordination and timing, traveler information, whether that be for cars or transit vehicles, thinking about what's the applications for the future in terms of user information on a smartphone for being able to travel and throughout our region. We have some other studies that we've done over time as part of competitive processes where we got additional funding to bring in consultants like our commuter park and ride study and our bike share study. Okay. Would it be better? Would you like me to pause at this point to ask questions about that before I talk a little bit about our data processes?
Luke Sinclair, Chair. I mean, do any commissioners have any questions right now? We could, I suppose, pause. I mean, Jessica, would you have any problem with going back to some of this stuff at the end if we think of questions later on?
No, Jessica Mortinger, no,
Okay.
that's no problem. We can go back. I just wanted to make sure because I rushed through a lot of information for you.
No, I think you can just plug on. It's good.
Okay. Right. So one of the required processes that we do in both our long-range transportation plan, Transportation 2040, and in our transportation improvement program is an evaluation of environmental justice. Environmental justice is a jargony kind of federal word that's really about fair treatment and meaningful involvement of people, regardless of race, ethnicity, income, or national origin or education, with respect to development of our plans and processes. What I'm showing you on the map at right is the two groups that make up the transportation. These are these environmental justice areas, because you meet the threshold or you don't in terms of using census data to determine that. In gray, you see the low to moderate income block groups in our community. And in the red crosshatch, you see the 99% confidence interval for minority block groups. So these are the areas, both of those together, the gray and the red, that make up the environmental justice areas in our community. we are doing work to be able to track both through our performance measures in Transportation 2040, which is a performance-based plan, the reality of transportation measures both in and out, like as in the community as a whole and also in our environmental justice zones. Here defines a little bit more in detail if you want to check this out. We define in our work, in our data analysis of evaluating projects, both in the planning process, so in Transportation 2040, and then in the implementation, to explore the reality of how the distribution of projects and the impacts we believe projects are having on these populations in our community. So here's low to moderate income households. We use this definition comes from also the community development block grant funding definition, where areas that are eligible within this low to moderate income households are eligible for those CDBG funds also. And so we share this data and this standard with them to use that. The minority data is one that we have set using our 5-year estimates to depict where we are in terms of populations that are over the confidence interval for the range of values that's likely to encompass those values. And so we feel pretty confident about this. I think in the future we have talked a little bit with Jeff and others about, deciding we've set this boundary in terms of, depending on what we anticipate happening. I'm going to flip back real quick to this map because we anticipate probably the largest change. These are kind of one point in time data sets and analysis when we do this work in our planning process. And the reality is in some of the outer areas, we have quite large block groups where we might anticipate with the next census that we will see some shift in what we consider environmental justice populations throughout our community. So that's one thing we have to watch in terms of making, in our performance-based planning is, and sometimes the metrics are moving more based on the changes in the census demographics than maybe some of the policy and project implementation that's happening throughout our region. So we just want to share this with you. That analysis is in greater detail. It's in our documents. It might be something that you're interested in checking out. We are also evaluating and beginning to do some additional metrics and analysis around transportation disadvantaged populations. There's some national literature around census defined populations that we believe have transportation vulnerabilities. And some of those populations, when they're in greater density in our community within these block groups, we're working to evaluate what that means in terms of disparity for things like sidewalk network or in access to healthy food, access to bus stops, and that sort of thing. And so here in this map at right, you see in the most darkest red score, the most intense areas of populations of demographics that we believe represent populations that traditionally have transportation vulnerability, follow all the way on the scale down to light red, yellow, green to blue, which we believe is the lowest transportation vulnerabilities within our community. That is based on these criteria areas from U.S. Census data information. And you can see here the Lawrence average for all of those. And then the greater intensity of the population within those groups, we have given it a higher score to really show where there's intensity. We are beginning to use this, and we're beginning to use this one with the City of Lawrence in the process that we just worked to start to begin facilitating around sidewalk improvement programs. So where the sidewalk or the city is enforcing code compliance with sidewalk condition. You will also probably see some of this if you follow our pedestrian planning work around the beginning exploration of exploring pedestrian networks. And where we believe there may or may not be disparities in access based on the geographic block group that you live in. And so hoping to understand if we can find, if there are those disparities, how we can do planning work around projects for both gap infill and community expectations for equity and sidewalk network distribution. So I think probably with some of the recent conversations I've heard you've had, this is maybe going to be of interest to you to follow in that process. We have put together, I would point out at the bottom of both of these pages that were included in your agenda packet, there's a link. It goes both to a web page and a handout that describes all of this, these analyses in some greater detail, tries to really simplify it and make it publicly understandable. It breaks down some pretty challenging, maybe some concepts into something a little simpler as we work through this. But we are beginning to use these to tell the story in our community about who the transportation decisions that are being made are impacting and how those impacts are playing into people's access and mobility and inevitably health and quality of life in our community. So we are beginning to do this work, and I wanted to bring it to your attention. So if you hear it in the conversation, you can kind of see where we are starting and where we intend to go with this. That's what I have for you this evening. I know that was really quick and I threw a lot of information at you after a already long conversation, but I'd be happy to entertain any questions you may have now or in the future about any of the work we do, or if you're interested in additional presentations about any of the specific planning products that we have, we can come back and do that again too.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Is there anybody that has any questions for Jessica tonight? Commissioner Rexroad?
Thank you, Commissioner Rexroad. Hey, thanks for a great presentation. If you said it and I missed it, I apologize. Did you define how we define minority households? What's the makeup of a minority household?
Yeah, so that's a U.S. Census definition, and those are self-selected on the census survey. Jeff, do you know specifically how they define those in relation to the nation?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. It will vary a little bit across regions and communities, and so it'll fluctuate depending upon where you're at and what the respondent rate is in the community. But typically it's the kind of the bellwether measurement is you just look across the matrix and then kind of associate, the numbers across, but it all just depends on the community and what level of geography that you're looking at to kind of come up with what that falls into.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ashworth? I think you're muted, Commissioner Ashworth.
Yeah, that's what happens after 9:30 in my world. Thank you, Jessica. I'm keenly interested, if you wouldn't mind touching again on the sidewalk. I think you got sidewalk distribution and the sidewalk improvement timeline. What's the timeline on using this data for sidewalk improvements? And does the sidewalk improvement mean the fact that the sidewalk exists, or also the sidewalk quality are we talking about?
Yeah, so Jessica Morton, your Transportation Planning Manager, there's two issues there. The first one, sidewalk improvement program, has been the cities, right now they're in year 3 of implementing enforcement of sidewalk condition after inspection. And the most recent process, so we worked with the Multimodal Transportation Commission and Municipal Services and Operations staff to build a model that selected the geographical area that was included to be inspected and to work on compliance with those defects for year 3. So that was already being used. The first 2 years of the program, MSO chose geographical areas in the community that were just bounded solely by a border they drew on a map that they thought was a representative area of a 10-year program as they broke it into areas. And as they got more comfortable with implementing that program, we recognized that we had heard, I think it's part of the community conversation also, the interest in doing that work where there was the highest benefit. So we worked with Multimodal Transportation Commission and MSO staff to build a model that projected pedestrian demand across our community based on a series of destinations that were determined to be priority destinations. And then we used that transportation disadvantaged block group layer as a way to weight at a 25% level. In addition to that demand, each segment then had a demand that was summed up from a series of processes that the model ran to choose the year 3 priorities. And they're currently in that process. And so that's an evolution. So we are already using that. And that's one thing. So that's for existing sidewalk condition. We are in the pedestrian planning process, recognizing that in terms of gap for infill of sidewalk network, we have already set the community priority in the MMTC has the Multimodal Transportation Commission when they adopted their non-motorized prioritization policy. It prioritizes, that's the bike ped funding, and that's how all the sidewalk gap projects get prioritized for funding, the ones that are happening with city resources. And in that process, all the projects that are on both sides of an arterial or collector street, or are along safe routes to schools on at least one side to make a continuous segment, are prioritized in that policy. The next bit of that, we've recognized there's 3 more elements we've heard as part of community conversations that we believe need to be evaluated to identify for gap infill. And that is access to transit, access to parks, and access to healthy food destinations. But we really want to put an equity lens on that, because I think one of the things that the previous conversations hasn't recognized when we were just looking at arterials, collectors, and safe routes to schools is there are many geographical areas in our community that, depending on when they were developed and what the sidewalk requirements were at the time of their development, there are larger neighborhoods where there is not necessarily a sidewalk access, which impacts access to these other opportunities in our community, which impacts people's access to mobility. And so we want to have that conversation, and that's where we envision in this process, we're going to build a process where we can evaluate each block group and the amount of linear mile of roadway compared to density, compared to sidewalk, to start to understand not only on a network level, but also within these geographical areas, if there is a standout kind of in that data with an equity lens about where we might need to target additional gap infill to make inroads around mobility.
Wow, Planning Commission Ashworth, that sounds like a lot of fun with GIS maps. Some intense work. So I'm excited to see some of that come to fruition, to see this hopefully someday in the paper where the priorities are going to be and the reasons for that priority. That's great.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Other questions for Jessica? Commissioner Carpenter.
First, thanks for putting my sidewalk in year 3. It's been a joy. But second, just back to Commissioner Ashworth, what you just been talking about, is this model for filling gaps going to be fluid, or are you going to be able to project out for a certain number of years in the future where these particular gaps will be filled? And I'm just asking because that could be helpful with some of our variance requests that we get.
Jessica Morton's your transportation planning manager. I'm not yet sure what that's going to look like in terms of what the output is, if that will just be a one-time identification of within the existing network, looking at where those gaps would be. But I do think, and we are having conversations also internally, and we will follow your conversations, I think, because I do think there probably needs to be some additional both community conversation about the expectation of sidewalks. It's probably unrealistic to imagine with the financial climate to envision any time in the near term having sidewalks on both sides of the street across our entire community. And even in transportation best practices, there is such a thing as street walks, which is basically shared street environments where it's appropriate based on some of the traffic operating conditions of the roadway, that it's appropriate to share spaces when the speed or volume is low enough with people walking. And so I think that that's a conversation we proposed in terms of our street walks and appropriate infrastructure type. We asked parents that as part of a safe routes work that we did. We didn't get a lot of traction in terms of street walks for students specifically in the cases where we gave parents at schools an option between two types of infrastructure, a street walk versus a sidewalk on a busier road. But I do think, it was mixed. I think in one case they said yes, and in the other case they said no. And it really was conditional on the environment, I think, of the neighborhood and land uses around those locations in specific. But I think those are things we're going to have to explore as part of the pedestrian plan, and the Lawrence Pedestrian Plan Steering Committee can hopefully help us guide that conversation. Because in addition to that conversation comes accessibility. And we know that we talked to Evan Carenta, who's the city ADA coordinator, and they have slated a 2023 ADA transition plan for the public right away. And so while we are not going to be able to do all of that work in the pedestrian plan, we recognize that's going to be a very important component of the conversation about mobility for many of the residents in our community.
Thank you.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. If I could just kind of piggyback on that, Jessica, can you, I guess, just sort of distill for us the importance of safe routes to school and what constitutes like a safe route to school? Because some of the variance requests we've had have been, I think, on a safe routes to school or in that area, and we've had to sort of wrestle with those types of issues.
Okay. Yeah, Jessica Morton, your transportation planning manager. So in the safe routes to school plans, we recognize that we took anonymized student data from our schools and looked within each boundary for each school at the density of where students were distributed across that school boundary. Recognizing that, again, there's limited resources both for gap infill, but also crossing improvements and other built environment constraints that we just talked about. Students live on every street in our community, and some of them are outside of boundaries. But looking within those boundaries, we looked at the density, and we tried to establish what we labeled as the safe routes to school routes. And as part of that program, that was primarily for prioritizing where we should make built environment improvements to those routes to ensure there's a continuous route, a sidewalk along, one side of the street or another. In some cases, the priority is set for arterials and collectors that should be on both sides, and for local streets that follow along safe routes, it can be on one side only, as long as that's a continuous route. So we wouldn't want something that flips back and forth on each side of the street, requiring unnecessary crossings for a trip to school. That really helps us direct the resources that we're looking at based on that density map to the places where the highest number of students are going to funnel in as they're making that trip into school. And so for each school in elementary and middle schools, we established basically a set of routes for that school. And in the plan, there are 3 different sets of maps. And so those routes are identified on our infrastructure maps as a way to then identify projects and a project listing of where there are projects that we believe should be constructed as part of the Safe Routes to School plans. and we're making progress on those. We have over time. There was ones when we adopted the plan. They're in progress. Things change, right? So we recognize that those routes, when there's boundary changes or there's other changes, maybe in between us planning to update that plan every 5 years, that we might need to go back and adjust those routes. We just did that with the Kennedy closing. We made an amendment to the Safe Routes to School plan in relation to those routes. Again, based on the student densities where we would anticipate the largest number of students funneling in, and reasonable, some reasonable within those reasonable walk sheds. We looked at walk sheds also in terms of what's a half mile, what's a mile and a half or greater, in terms of, obviously, if there's a lot more density in the inner rings, that justified more likelihood to walk in some of that work. And then the other part of that, I think, is because students still live on every street in our community, we have both two other sets of maps, an encouragement maps that we did in the plan, where on those, we worked with public health to publish maps that show the existing sidewalk network for every school and where there are marked crossings, and if there's a crossing guard or other relevant information. And those are listed on their Be Active Safe Routes website. And that, in some cases, those routes that we talked about that are on the infrastructure maps are also shown on the encouragement maps because they exist. However, where there are locations where there were not sidewalk available on either even one side of the street, or it's a future project, but it's not yet slated for construction, like committed for funding, we didn't identify those as routes because we have to be really careful about where we're encouraging kids to walk and bike based on where there's available sidewalk network. And then we also worked a little bit on developing some preliminary standardized circulation maps about something we've seen in the news and we know is an issue at the beginning of every school year, is traffic circulation around our schools. People taking their children to school are a large part of the congestion in our neighborhoods around schools. And so we had realized in our Safe Routes to School process that there wasn't really consistent standardization of some of that in terms of how we share them, for how the parents are, as part of the we community, the Safe Routes to School working group, was sharing information about that. So maybe that answers a little bit of your questions. You might have a follow-up about how we viewed that in the process, but that's kind of how we framed it.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. I don't have a follow-up. That was fantastic. Okay. Thank you. Other commissioners? No questions for Jessica? It doesn't look like it.
It's late.
Okay. Last call.
Mr. Chair, okay. Mr. Chair, if I may, just a comment from the room here. I think you're getting to see like a barely scratching the surface of all the work that Ashley and Jessica put into everything that is going on transportation related. So, I mean, this is really a high level 101. We could go quite detailed into the weeds. There's a lot of great information they produce. The one thing I would say is to keep in mind is that on the MPO's website, you can find all of the documentation, the maps, the history. So if you ever have questions, it is all online. It is all available, and you can find all kinds of maps. But like I said, this is just a very high level look, just barely scratching the surface of all the good work that they put in.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, and I think that's pretty apparent. I feel like maybe the late hour has cut short some of the discussion, but Jessica, thank you for staying on so late. Sorry I went so late, and hopefully people will just reach out to you if they have questions directly.
Yeah, I would encourage them to. We're available by phone and email, and this is the work we do all the time. So we're always happy to engage in conversations about anything that might be relevant to the work you're doing, or even personal interests that you have about what's happening in our community in regards to transportation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Oh, Luke Sinclair, Chair. Commissioner Ashworth.
Commissioner Ashworth, I just wanted to say thank you. It's amazing to me every time I go on city county websites for planning, the wealth of information that is there. And this is just great to have a reminder that we have so much information at our fingertips, and we can barely scratch the surface of what is there. So thank you all.
Luke Sinclair, Chair. Agreed. I think then that brings us to miscellaneous new or old business. And I don't have any listed. I don't see any listed in the agenda. Is there anything, Jeff, to add now?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. We have no other items to add this evening.
Okay. Then I guess, I never remember. Do we adjourn or recess on Monday nights?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. We need a motion to recess to go into your Wednesday meeting.
Okay. Does anyone want to make such a motion?
Sharon Ashford, Planning Commission, I move we recess until Wednesday evening.
Thank you, Commissioner Ashworth. Luke Sinclair, Chair. Do we have a second? Everyone wants to stay on. Commissioner Willie, I think, raised her hand. Second. Jeff, can you read the roll?
Thirdly, Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for your hard work. And we'll see you next time.